Ben felt himself slowly waking up for the first time in what felt like ages, but he didn't open his eyes. His memory seemed blurry, but his body felt good, like a massive weight had been lifted from him while at the same time he was freed from a terrible pain he couldn't quite remember. He wanted to enjoy it while he could. The bed he was in was comfortable enough, though it didn't feel like the one he had at Sonia's, and he was content to just lay there, letting his mind wander as he did until a thought interrupted him. Wait, why do I have 3 now? With the revelation he'd leveled up complex mind came the memories of everything that happened, and he bolted upright and opened his eyes, shocking the person by his side, a fully cloaked figure who had been sitting down reading a book but threw themselves at him as soon as he was up, wrapping him in a hug. "Oh, thank the gods," Thera said, squeezing him as if he would try to escape otherwise. "You're finally up." He hugged her back just as hard. The last thing he remembered was that the invader had been killed and he was sure he was going to die, but she had been safe. To see her sitting there was the greatest relief he could ask for. "I'm so glad you're safe," he told her, feeling the tension leave his body. "And the others?" The last he'd seen, Stefan Wedrow seemed to be safely by her side, but Will had been thrown away when the invader attacked. Thankfully she quickly pushed his concerns away. "All fine. They're safely home now. They wanted to stay, but their nations wanted a report of events, and once all of the healers showed up they couldn't delay any longer." "Wait, healers?" She nodded, not taking her head away from his chest. Apparently the gods that were watching contacted their nations to send healers to Stonewall as fast as they could. The last 2 weeks they'd been working around the clock to keep you alive. 2 weeks. Damn, this really was a bad one. Looks like I finally have a reason to be grateful to at least a couple other gods in this world though. He would have to remember to ask Myriad to pass on his thanks when he got the chance, but put the thought to the side as another question came up. But how am I even alive? I didn't think Stefan Wedrow would be able to do anything after having their mana sucked out like that. I was sure I was a goner. "Ah, well, that's a little complicated," she told him, dreading the conversation she knew she was going to have and afraid of how he would react, but it wasn't something that could be put off. She carefully explained what happened after she killed the demon and how they came to the conclusion they'd have to make use of its organs to save his life. He just silently listened as she spoke, raising her anxiety as the story went on. What if he was angry? What if he hated her? She was ready to accept it if he did, but she stood by the choice. She didn't want him to die. "So," he began as she braced for the worst. "You got 2 magic levels. You're halfway through your quest, that's incredible. Are you not mad at all?" "What are you talking about?" "We incorporated parts of the most hated and heinous monsters in the galaxy into your body. Plenty of people would rather be dead." "Sure, but I'm not one of them," he told her with certainty, and hugged her tighter. "As far as I'm concerned those were just materials to be used, and you saved my life. I don't care what bits you shove into me in the future if it means I get to live another day." He was aware that some people on his homeworld might object to xenotransplants on ethical or religious grounds, but he couldn't care less. The biggest concern he had was that someone might get experience if they killed him now, but even that was regulated to a passing curiosity about how much he would provide. "Oh good, I was a little worried." A little was probably an understatement. He felt her body relax through her cloak as he told her it was fine, and knew the thought must have been weighing on her mind. "I told you the boy wouldn't have a problem," a familiar Yeti said as he made his way into the room. "Good to see you, Falk. Your favorite apprentice is back in the land of the living," Ben told his teacher as a smile stretched across his face. "Bah, and I was so close to being free of your nonsense," his teacher told him, grinning back, despite himself. "Hey now, you can't say that, I'm a patient. If I can't talk like that when you're hurt I'll never be able to. You're always a patient for some reason or other. It's part of my charm. Nothing charming about scaring everyone half to death each time you're pulled in here looking worse than the last, and no matter how excited you are to see your wife, maybe you should leave that sort of thing for when you've got some privacy." Thera was horrified to realize she hadn't let go of him since he'd woken up and he was still hugging her, so she slipped from his arms and awkwardly went back to her chair, making a half-hearted comment about not being his wife as she did. His teacher gave a little chuckle at his niece's embarrassment before he went on. "How's your body feeling? Anything off?" "No, I feel incredible actually, like I was never even injured." He felt around his stomach and chest, expecting to find a scar but coming up blank. "I'll have to thank the healers who worked on me, seems like they did a great job." The mood of the room darkened a little, but the way Falk went on made him think it was all in his head. Most of them went to head home this morning since your treatment was completed, but you'll get your chance to talk to the main one later. If you're feeling up to it, you can come to the shop once Sonia gives you a look over if you want. A lot of things have happened that I think you'll be excited for. Sure sounds good, but what time is it? Even if I just woke up, I don't want to be out too late. You're fine, it's just before lunch, so you have plenty of daylight to burn. Wait, why aren't you watching the shop if it's this early? 'Cause I needed to check on my accident-prone apprentice, obviously. Now get that grin off your face, and let's get you checked out. Sounds good, you going to come along, Thera? She shook her head. I would, but now that you're up, I have some work to do. Oh, okay, he said, more disappointment leaking from his voice than intended. Sorry, but it's important, unfortunately. I'll ask Auntie to pick something tasty up for us later at dinner, so don't be out too late, okay? And don't be so greedy for her time, boy, his teacher told him. She's been stuck here every day waiting for you to get yourself together. Uncle, he didn't need to know that. She left Ben to get himself checked out while going off to do what she needed to. While she had finally been able to breathe a sigh of relief now that her friend was awake and out of danger, there was a new weight to bring her down, and it was waiting for her at home. She hesitated at the door for a minute, not wanting to go in when she could be relaxing instead after such a long few weeks. But Thera treated it like a bandage that needed to be torn off, taking a breath before she opened the door and walked in. Lounging on the couch comfortably, flipping through the pages of a book her Aunt Sonia had left on the table was a void of white mana in roughly the shape of a succubus. She wished it was her Aunt Lux who she had a reasonable relationship with, but the one in her home didn't radiate light around her, instead she simply existed, as if something had punched out a hole in space to find a white backdrop behind it. Hello Vividus, she said, greeting her aunt, the great life spirit, with a voice filled with disdain. Hello child, I take it your pet mortal is awake? She asked, indifferent to the emotions in her niece's tone. She ground her teeth in frustration at having to deal with her. It was something she would never choose freely, even if her aunt didn't feel anything about it. As far as Thera was concerned, there was nothing but bad blood between them. But as much as Thera disliked her Vividus, she couldn't be too rude. Not after getting her to save Ben's life. He is, thank you for treating him. Now if you could tell me what you want, I'll send you on your way. What do you mean by that? The spirit asked in genuine confusion, the first emotion Thera had seen from her since she arrived in the morning. What do you mean, what do I mean? You must have come here for a reason. I know you don't like leaving the Life Valley where you can run your little experiments, so what do you want? Child, I am here because you called me. She sounded genuinely confused, but Thera didn't believe it. Why would I call you? No offense, I'm grateful you saved Ben's life and all, but I still hate your guts. The idea of calling her aunt of her own free will like that was unimaginable to her. She thought of Vividus so rarely it didn't even cross her mind that she might be able to do something for Ben. Of course, those feelings didn't stop her from asking for help when she showed up in the morning, but they weren't the types to meet up over something like familial affection. If that's the case, then the air spirit misled me. I'll be on my way after I check the boy's condition tonight. She was about to pick up her book to continue it when Thera stopped her. Wait, she said, head in hand. If you heard it from an air spirit, I know what you're talking about. I just wasn't expecting you. When she'd requested the help of an air spirit to send any life spirits her way, she'd never expected her aunt. In fact, the only reason it wasn't the least desirable outcome was because of the timing. Her aunt seemed to want to know the reason she'd been asked to come here, and feeling awkward that she actually was the reason explained everything, albeit briefly. From learning that gaining other magics would help her improve her control as a whole to training with Funa and trying to come up with a solution to gain life magic as well, which ultimately led her to try to find a life spirit. But none of that matters now. I managed to get level 0 life magic not long ago. Honestly, I don't know why the spirits would bother you when I asked for a regular life spirit or two to make their way to town. As Thera spoke, Vividus began placing her undivided attention on her. You really should try to know your place amongst the common spirits, she lectured. Even if they aren't able to understand the nature of your relationship with Abris, they can at least grasp its significance. Who amongst them would leave a matter concerning you to a regular spirit if they could avoid it? I guess, the nature of how typical spirits viewed her seemed as mysterious to her as it did to themselves, but she knew that even if they didn't understand parent-child relations as creatures that didn't have any themselves, they were capable of comprehending friendship and seemed to view her connection to her father as something similar to that, though much deeper. More importantly though, you say you actually managed to get life magic? Her aunt asked, a hint of excitement tinging her voice. What are all of your current magic levels? Earth is 4, charm is 1, and life is at 0, why? You've made impressive progress to get Earth so high so fast, Vividas said in a way she'd never heard from her aunt before. Her voice held approval in it. Alright, I've decided, no reason to waste a trip out here. There's a training ground nearby, correct? Let's go out there. She fired off a spell that Thera couldn't understand, but she wasn't going anywhere with her, at least not without an explanation. Why, what do you want? Obviously to improve your magic. Alright, so what were you going to teach me? They'd made their way to the training grounds and gotten plenty of strange looks along the way. Not many people in the world had the opportunity to see a great spirit, and since only a handful of people in Stonewall knew of her heritage, that meant the majority of residents they passed no clue what the mysterious white void they were looking at actually was, nor why it was with the town savior/outcast/menace depending on who was asked. That was something she could ignore though. Thera was used to receiving looks when she was out, and that chance that she might get something useful from her aunt for the first time was interesting enough that she decided to give it a go. She was aware that life magic had a couple applications outside of healing, but it would be hard to find anyone outside of the great life spirit who was knowledgeable at them, let alone as proficient as Vividas was sure to be. And yet, despite being willing to swallow her pride for a chance to learn more about the magic skill she'd gained, that wasn't what her aunt had in mind. If you want to learn any advanced life magic, then come find me once you're at least level 6, and focus on the healing spells the average life mage is proficient in. As it stands, you're too much of a beginner for anything interesting. What? Then why did you bring me out here? She asked in a huff, annoyed she'd let herself get her hopes up that her aunt might be useful in training her for once. Simple really, Funa made a mistake in what she taught you, I'm simply going to correct it. As she spoke, 3 dark spirits flew out of the woods and floated between her and Vividas, which she politely greeted before focusing back on her aunt. I'm sorry, you're telling me you have a better idea on how to train me in dark magic than the great dark spirit? She asked skeptically. No, like I said, I'm simply correcting a mistake. You might have access to dark magic right now if you could feel dark mana, so hold out your hand and let these ones fill you with their mana. Hopefully, 3 is enough. She did as she was told in the small hope it would help, but it didn't stop her from arguing. I have an overwhelming amount of dark mana, since you clearly haven't been paying attention since my birth. That's been my main problem. True, but you aren't feeling dark mana, you're feeling charmed dark mana. The charm is applied to it before the mana leaves your soul, you'd never know what it feels like to use dark mana without it. Now stop arguing and focus, using an afternoon won't be any great loss for you. As much as she hated to admit it, Vividas was right. An afternoon was nothing if it got her access to the magic and one step closer to completing her god's quest, so she did as her aunt asked. She stopped arguing and devoted her full attention to the feeling of the mana the spirits were moving through her body. Leaving the clinic took longer than expected. As soon as Sonia found out he was up, she insisted on giving him a thorough look over, despite his insistence that he felt fantastic. He understood where she was coming from at least. He'd been unconscious and in bed for weeks on top of having a xenotransplant done with mystery organs in the middle of the woods. When he thought about it in those terms, he became a little worried too, but once it was all done he made his way back to his favorite shop in town. "Aw fuck, it's good to be back," he said, enjoying the sound of metal hitting metal when he entered the store. "I'm never leaving my forge again, I can't go leaving it alone in the world if anything happens to me. Wait, who's at the forge?" Fuck was in the front of the shop, but he could hear something being made in the back, but nobody else worked there, unless. "Did you really go and replace me when you thought I was going to die?" "Calm down," his teacher told him. "If you'll remember, I didn't even want you to begin with, no reason for me to grab a replacement." "True, but then who's in the back?" "We'll get to that later. First things first, remember the money I took from you a while ago for supplies?" "I do, it was a small fortune." You aren't wrong boy, but they came in and I think you'll agree it was worth it." His teacher reached under his desk and pulled out a small box, something he never would have guessed cost as much as he'd paid for whatever it contained, and he opened it up, finding 10 rings contained within. They were all very plain, made of a simple gray metal and thin band, but each had a single word stamped on top, and the implication was enough to make Ben salivate. "Are these what I think they are?" he asked, unable to tear his eyes from them. Depends, his teacher replied, an excited grin stretched across his own face. Were you thinking they're 9th level enchantments of each major affinity? 9th level. How did you manage to get your hands on these? To place the entirety of a 9th level skill onto a single ring took a level of skill and patience that wouldn't be easy to find, not to mention that it also meant finding either blessed enchanters with their affinited magics trained to the point it was almost going to awaken, or finding a regular enchanter with their skill trained just as well. Neither was an easy feat. I've gotten a connection or two in my time, he said smugly. Truth be told, I was hoping to get more, but finding any enchanters that could make rings like those with a high level of either a combined magic or a non-affinity magic is much harder than I thought it would be, so I'll keep my eyes out, but if you want anything like that, then you'll have to make it yourself. He slipped the rings on his fingers and admired them. This is already incredible, Fock. Really, thank you. Bah, don't go feeling too soft about it now, you did pay for them after all. Now aside from that, why not greet the other surprise you got, his teacher told him, gesturing to the back of the shop where he could still hear metal being hammered. What, you got me something else? He asked, excited about what it could be considering the quality of the rings. I'm going to have to almost die more often if this is the sort of treatment I get when I wake up. You're at death's door often enough as it is, and this one isn't from me. You'll understand after a bit of talking, so come on. What Ben saw making a sword at the forge could best be described as a mass of tentacles. Sky blue at the base and turning to a bright red at the tips, he found it strangely beautiful in appearance, though he couldn't identify the race it belonged to, even given how distinct it was. As far as he could tell, the creature lacked eyes or anything he would consider traditional sensory organs, but it seemed entirely focused on its work until Fock called out to it. Zandale, he's here if you're ready to finish up. It moved at Fock's voice as a ripple went through it and stopped what it was doing to walk over. I greet the Apostle of Myriad, as your teacher said, I am Zandale, Apostle of Oro. It is wonderful to see you alive after hearing what you've been through. It was his first time meeting another apostle and they seemed polite enough, but he lacked knowledge on the numerous gods of the world and didn't know what he represented. Still, manners never hurt. It's a pleasure to meet you, Zandale, anything I can do for you? He wasn't sure why they would be here waiting for him, and they seemed confused by that lack of knowledge. Were you not expecting me? Your god contacted my own weeks ago about this meeting? Was he expecting him? Even if he wasn't always the best apostle, he at least tried to listen when Myriad spoke, but he didn't remember anything about a guest. Wait, didn't he say there would be a surprise for me when I got back? Is this it? For the time being, he decided to be polite in a way that wouldn't make his god look bad if he could help it. Myriad said there might be someone here when I came back, but that was right when I left and he was going to explain more later. Not sure how much you've heard, but I've been out of commission for a while. Of course, how thoughtless of me, it rushed to apologize. In that case, why not take a seat and I'll explain the purpose of my visit. They made themselves comfortable while Fock went back to the front of the shop to watch for customers. First off, I am the skill master. Okay? His confused reaction produced a sound he interpreted as a laugh from the creature, who was quick to apologize. Sorry for the outburst, I take it you haven't heard of me? No, sorry. It's quite alright, that's just a novel experience for me is all. How many decades has it been since that happened? It wondered aloud before getting back on track. But that means my explanation must also be longer as a result. To put it simply, I've been a follower of Oro for many decades now, and as a knowledge god, I show my faith through learning. In my particular case I learn and develop various skills. Your god informed mine of your connect skill, and from the characteristics I've heard it sounds like it could aid the growth and development of my most important ones, so I'd like the chance to learn it from you. Well, I'd help if I could, but you must have heard it was a gift skill. I don't know how a person could get it without following Myriad. That will not be an issue, it was quick to say. I possess 4 very special skills that allow me to learn from others as well as teach them skills as well, so whenever I get the chance to learn a new skill I typically pay with one in kind. That was the proposal your god made to mine, and when I'd heard the details of your particular ability, I cleared my schedule to rush to this town. I have hundreds, so I'm sure you'll find one that suits you. Hundreds of potential skills, and he would be able to pick one to learn. He had to wipe his mouth, the thought had him salivating. Part of him was mildly concerned that others would be able to learn Connect from Zandale instead of having to go through Myriad to get the skill, but if his god arranged it he couldn't have been too concerned. I'll absolutely do it. Just out of curiosity, if I had other skills you didn't, would that mean I could learn more from you too? It gave a small chuckle. Of course, but as I've said, I have hundreds of skills. I'll lend you a book later containing the full list of them I have for you to go through to figure out which are possible for you to learn based on some of the conditions involved. But if you find you have any knot on it, you're free to tell me. I do love a fruitful trip after all. He would keep an eye out as he read, but he wouldn't get greedy. Being able to learn one new skill would be great enough as it was, even if it sounded like there might be some conditions to which ones he could. Alright, sounds good. In that case, I have time to get started if you do. Excellent, then if you'd please grab my limb while using Connect and I'll activate my skills. It's doubtful I'll be able to gain the skill on the first attempt or that you'll be able to get whichever skill you desire on the first one either, but I'll be sure to stay in town until both of us do. A bit of time spent was a small price to pay, and he did as he was told, grabbing onto an outstretched tentacle and connecting with Zandale. He felt a small amount of mana enter him and quickly retract as the connection was made, and the connection was suddenly strengthened in the same way it was when he'd done it with Sakel. Wait, did it work already? He asked in surprise, but the other apostle gave a negative. The two skills I'm using right now are Borrower and Learner. Both let me copy a skill for a period of time, while Learner in particular lets me learn it, but the condition is that I use it to get used to it before the time is up. Of course, if I don't learn it before the time limit, then I can just activate my skill again to continue. Something about that sounded familiar, and he thought about something his god had previously told him when he first learned he could enchant with other skills. You mentioned you have 4 special skills, right? Does the reason you want Connect have to do with them having similar effects? Indeed. It said. The enjoyment Ben felt bubbling in its mind felt familiar compared to how alien the rest of it seemed against all of the hominid types he'd used his skill on. I've spent over a century to train the skills Learner, Lender, Teacher, and Borrower in the hopes that I'd be able to get them to combine when one awakened. Hearing that another skill with similar properties now exists, I had to get it. He could feel all sorts of positive emotions coming from it as it thought about the efforts it went through to train those skills, and Ben understood its excitement. It wouldn't be accurate to say everyone wanted to awaken their skills. Many people in the world were content to get them to a certain level and let them be rather than constantly have to push themselves to new heights, but for those that did, the payoff was huge, with boosts to their base abilities incomparable to just going up a level or two. So when you do, what will it awaken into? He asked, curiosity leaking from his voice. I don't know, no one has managed it before. Wait, so you've spent over a century working on something that might have no payoff? That's the risk of those who aim to learn. Sometimes the results don't live up to expectations. Though I'm not too worried. When a skill awakens, it will almost always merge with other skills if it can, to reach greater heights. Interesting, I wonder if any of my skills will combine if I ever awaken them. It was a fun thought, but still a while off yet. As they spoke, both aloud and through the connection made, Ben took the role of a teacher, explaining everything he knew of his skill while Zandale eagerly listened, and allowed Ben to train with it himself given the bountiful resource he was connected with, enchanting with all of the skills he could feel coming from the tentacled creature onto some metal rods laying around in the back. He could get Falk to tell him what they were later so he could make use of them in the future if it was possible, but from the feel he could tell they were low level. It made sense to him at least. Training up hundreds of skills would be impossible, especially if they wished to focus on their important core ones. No matter how long a race lived, very few had unending lifespans, and even those ones could still die. Time couldn't be wasted like that. Zandale enjoyed learning how to use the skill by feeling Ben put it to work through the connection, and liked that the hours passed until it was almost time to close up for the day. Connect level increased. Max level of the priest job achieved. Ben! Ankh yelled out as he got into the Adventurers Guild and quickly ran over to him. Are you alright to be up? The rumor was going around you were barely hanging on to life. I'm all good, he told her reassuringly. But what rumors? I don't think one injured guy is that important. There were dozens of healers rushing into town to treat you, of course there would be rumors about it. She yelled, before asking in a far quieter voice. Speaking of, you aren't a secret noble or something, are you? Everyone in the guild has been placing bets trying to figure out why so many nations mobilized some healers to treat you. Man, people are really starved for entertainment here, huh? Anyway, no, I just have a fairly important friend out of town that was able to get me help when things were looking bad. It was technically the truth. He counted myriad amongst his friends, and he wasn't exactly in town. It must be a good friend to manage that. An excellent one, and I'm all better now, so no more gambling on if I'd live or die or whatever you all were doing. Oh, neither the guild leader nor I would allow something like that, it's a little too barbaric. All gambling began and ended on how you were able to get treatment, so if it's nothing private I'll pass on what you told me and nobody should bother you. Works for me. Excellent. And with that out of the way, what can I do for you? I know it's not my place to say, but I don't think you should be taking any quests when you just got out of the clinic. Nothing like that. I'm just here to use the job change room. She said, tilting her head. If she had a face, he was sure there would be a confused look on it. Weren't you just here for that not too long ago? What can I say, it's been an eventful few months, he told her, not mentioning that he'd already changed it once since then. Alright, well you know where it is. Make sure you rest up before coming back for any new requests, okay? Of course I could use a break, he said, waving her off as he made his way to the job change room. When he got there he placed his hand on the crystal and let the options fill his mind. Available jobs. Enchanter. Trap user. Tree tamer. Craftsman alchemy path. Craftsman artistic path. Craftsman blacksmith path. Craftsman cooking path. Craftsman stonecrafts path. Craftsman sewing path. Heretic. Mind user. Holy craftsman. Kin. It was exciting to see 3 new and potentially interesting jobs, though he was a little surprised there was nothing related to his new hammer and knife wielder skills, and assumed those jobs could only be unlocked once they leveled up once or twice. As curious as he was for the other ones though, it didn't matter. He knew what he was picking and made his choice. Acquired job Enchanter level 0. Bonuses granted to improving mana recovery, and intelligence. Enchanting will receive a growth bonus. All other skills will receive a minor growth bonus. Name, Ben Hef. Race, human. Titles, Apostle of Myriad, the Forgotten One, Miracle Maker. Jobs, Enchanter, LV0. Previous jobs, Apprentice Craftsman, Craftsman, Priest. Attributes. Vitality, 165. Vitality recovery rate, 1 per hour. Mana, 89. Mana recovery rate, 6 per minute. Strength, 151. Agility, 84. Stamina, 644. Intelligence, 326. Affinities. Light, 3. Life, 2. Fire, 4. Water, 3. Air, 4. Earth, 2. Death, 3. Dark, 1. Space, 4. Time, 5. Resistances. Light, 68. Life, 72. Fire, 75. Water, 69. Air, 66. Earth, 81. Death, 78. Dark, 85. Space, 63. Time, 61. Blessed skills. Crafting LV5. Enchanting LV4. Focus LV4. Passive skills. World Speak Plus. Tolerance LV1. Sacrilege LV3. Complex Mind LV2. Bind. Partial Demonic Body. Active skills. Dismantling LV2. Stealth LV1. Connect LV5. Hidden Mind LV1. Calculate LV0. Knife Wielder LV0. Hammer Wielder LV0. Blessings. Myriad's Blessing. Anilia's Blessing. Trials. Trial of Analia and Talona. As exciting as it was to hear that all of his skills would receive a minor bonus, from what he'd read it was so insignificant that it shouldn't be a deciding factor when taking the job, but for someone who wanted it was nice indeed. As enchanting was a magic that made use of all skills, it made sense that they should all grow some as well to properly make use of the skill, and Ben was grateful for it, eagerly looking over his card after taking it and feeling pretty good about his growth, at least until he saw something that raised some concern in him. Under his passive skills was a new one he'd never heard an announcement of before, presumably because it happened while he was unconscious. Partial demonic body. The skill didn't have a level, which meant he probably couldn't improve it, and as far as he was concerned that was for the best. While he didn't have an issue with demon organs being used to save his life, he didn't expect any changes to occur. He doubted its inclusion on his status simply meant he had demon organs in him now, but he'd been told time and time again that nothing the system did was negative for its users, so at the very least he would assume it was fine for the time being and just leave the option hidden on his card. As he got home from the guild, the atmosphere of the house felt tense as soon as he walked in, and he made his way to the kitchen where 3 people were sitting in an uncomfortable silence. Thera and Sonia were expected at least, even if their mood was not, but the third was a surprise that put him on guard. Therazad Vividus, the great life spirit, was sitting at the table with them, much to Ben's shock, and the tense silence that filled the room made a lot more sense. "It appears your pet has made it through the day," she said as he arrived, and not knowing what to do he tried to crack a joke. "Demoted from fiancé to pet, huh, harsh." Nobody laughed and he felt the awkwardness of the room increase. Tough crowd. "I'm just here to inspect your body, and then I'll take my leave. Take off your shirt and let's get started." He looked to Sonia, who gave him a nod and did as he was told, taking off his shirt and having a seat as the spirit at first placed its hands on his chest, but then began sinking its entire arms into his body. Visually nothing appears wrong and the organs themselves are functioning fine, having properly integrated with the rest of you. "Has anything seemed off to you today?" He hesitated to bring it up for a moment, but even if Thera didn't like her, she might be able to shed some light on his new skill. "My body feels fine, better than usual in fact, but I checked my card earlier and I had a new passive skill called partial demonic body." "Level 0 or no level?" she asked, voice suddenly filled with interest. "No level." "Is your race still listed as the same on your card?" "Yes, why? Can it change?" She ignored his question and focused on the skill. "You should be fine. Technically, you're currently akin to a chimera, but you haven't changed in any meaningful way, especially if your race hasn't changed. Your new organs are superior in almost every way to a standard hominids, but the biggest change you'll see as far as I can determine from their function is you'll heal slightly faster, have an improved immune system as a whole, and likely will become a bit more resistant to poisons." So far, he was hearing only positives. Any improvement to healing was especially great given how often he was injured, and even though his body was already designed to handle a certain amount of illness and foodborne poisons by the gods that built it, an increase could only be worth it, though it did leave him curious. Will there really be that much difference for poison resistance? I killed a bunch of demons by poisoning them before. Admittedly, the spikes and hammer contributed a fair bit too, but the poison didn't do nothing. There's a world of difference between what you'd get from a standard demon to one that had awakened into a true invader, she told him, revealing that she was aware of the connection between the two groups. Even if they were close, it would be like comparing a 9th level skill to a 0th level awakened one. The organs themselves seem to feed on a small amount of mana, which is why they must be listed as a passive skill, but I doubt you'll see any other effects than what I described. Alright, if you're sure then thanks for looking me over. I'm always happy to view an interesting specimen. Should anything unusual happen, have my niece take you to the Life Valley if it seems related. Her task done, she quickly left the house, thanking Sonia for her hospitality and telling Thera to visit her if she trained her life magic up to level 6. As soon as it was just the 3 of them, the 2 women breathed a sigh of relief. Finally, Thera said happily. She can be a bit much, Sonia agreed. So why was she even here? Ben asked. Neither of you seem like a fan. Remember that air spirit I asked to bring a life spirit to town? Well, apparently because of my connection to my father, that meant getting the great life spirit, she groaned. Though I guess it was for the best, she was the one that ultimately saved you. Wait, really? It made sense when he thought about it, he'd just been too surprised to consider it when he saw her, and everyone in town had only mentioned healers coming, nobody said anything about a great spirit. She only arrived today, Sonia explained. Which is lucky for you. We were all estimating that it would take at least 2 more months for your body to properly start adapting to your new organs, and that was if you lived at all. She was able to finish the process in a single day. Damn, I guess I'll have to thank her next time I see her. Don't bother, Thera told him. You heard her right? You were just a curious specimen to her. She might not have done anything at all if she didn't find it interesting. Thankfully, the overall mood of the house began to lift as she left and they were able to enjoy dinner in peace. Ben wasn't sure how they kept him fed and alive all that time he wasn't conscious, and he was pretty sure he didn't want to know, given that aside from the presence of magic, overall medical knowledge seemed worse than his previous world. Still, the fact that it had been so long made the food all the tastier, and he enjoyed it with the conversation and company until he needed to go to bed. As he got himself comfy, fluffing his pillow and laying back while preparing to flip through the book of skills he got from Zandale, he heard his door open and watched Thera walk in. "Night crawling, Thera?" "But we aren't even married yet," he joked, pulling his blanket over his chest. He was expecting some sort of reaction but got nothing. Instead, she just sat at the edge of his bed. "Something wrong?" "I wanted to talk about it earlier, but I couldn't find the right time," she started awkwardly, sounding unsure of herself as she spoke. "About what you said before everything happened." "I think you're right, I'll start looking for a new party to adventure with." She'd thought long and hard about it, as he'd been on the brink of death for the last 2 weeks and knew that if he woke up she'd have to do this. He had been right after all, he was a craftsman, he shouldn't be hunting dangerous monsters like that, and she shouldn't be forcing him into it, even if she didn't think she could be comfortable with another party. They would still be friends, it just meant he wouldn't be putting his life on the line. It had taken a lot of determination to tell him, even though it wasn't what she wanted, so of course he had to be stubborn and contrarian. "Vetoed," he told her, making an X with his arms. "Sorry, but I'm going to keep partying with you." "What? This whole thing was your idea?" "Yeah, and it was a dumb idea. I only said it 'cause I thought I was holding you back, and maybe I am, but I don't want to stop adventuring with you. You could get hurt again, hell, you might actually die next time. Then I'll work so that doesn't happen. Besides, you were kidnapped last time and I don't want you dying when I'm not around either. Has anyone ever told you you're impossible?" she said. It had taken a lot of determination to do this, and now here he was, just completely refusing her. The fact that she was so happy about it was irrelevant. "It's part of my appeal," he told her with a smile. "I wouldn't mind taking a week off after what we just went through, but other than that you aren't getting rid of me so easily." "Pretty sure you just had a couple of weeks off," she said, smiling back. "Bah, unconscious time doesn't count, I need some real mental recuperation." "Alright, sounds good. Anyway, I should probably leave before Aunt Sonia notices and gets any weird ideas. Sleep well, Ben." "You too, Thera." "Ben, it's so good to have you back," Myriad yelled as he woke up in his god's realm. "Good to be back, I escaped death yet again." "Well, stop walking into situations where you have to. Thera literally just gave you an out and you turned it away. Hey now, do you really want to spend our first meeting in weeks complaining about something you know I won't change my mind on?" Myriad sighed, the sparkle he had when Ben first got there dulling with his attitude. "No, I don't know what else I would expect now, honestly. I haven't heard any other gods talking about what a handful their humans are, heck, I haven't heard about any of the other summoned getting in as much trouble as you do." "Ah, that can't be right. The rest of them are out prepping to fight for the fate of the world while I'm just a humble craftsman. You probably just don't hear about any of their near-death experiences, because it comes with the territory of being a hero." He understood Ben's train of thought, but Myriad wasn't buying it. Still, there was no point focusing on the matter when there was so much else to discuss. "Well, first off, I noticed you went to the job change room, but since you didn't call for me, I take it you took Enchanter as expected?" "I did, though, since you brought it up, I did get 3 new ones I wouldn't mind an explanation on. Holy Craftsman, Mind User, and Kin." Well, I can tell you right away, I've never heard of Kin, but the other 2 are simple enough. Mind User grants bonuses to all mind-type skills and provides major bonuses to the intelligence attribute, of course, given the fact that you don't seem to have any issue with raising your mind skills even without a related job, it might be less of a priority overall. On the other hand, that also means that if you did take it, you could likely expect an even greater increase to your various skills, so it would probably be worth it eventually. As for Holy Craftsman, you would have unlocked it by having taken the Craftsman and Priest jobs. The skills you get bonuses for would be the same as the ones for both jobs, and as a side bonus it would make it easier for you to make job change crystals. Wait, hold on, I can make those? Of course, where else would they come from? I kind of just assumed the gods made them or something. If that was the case, they'd be significantly more rare. It's a specific type of enchanting spell that has to be bound within a spherical crystalline structure, but as long as you have the ability to make the spell, a skill to shape the crystal, and a strong connection with a god, then there's no issue with making them, though selling them is frowned upon, so it's not something you could profit off of. Doesn't matter, teach me how later. If it needs a special enchanting spell to make, then it might give me some decent job experience. I will when I have time. Things have gotten rather hectic up here while you've been unconscious. Why, what's been happening? You probably wouldn't know this, but in the distant past there was a group that raised up demons and worshipped them as gods. Given the size of the horde you encountered, we're worried that that's happening again. Sounds bad. That's an understatement. This close to the war, having enemies within could be disastrous. Imagine our efforts being sabotaged before the war even begins, or a horde of demons coming to attack our armies hours before the gates are expected to open. Even worse, in the last few weeks we've been searching for them, we haven't found any evidence at all. Well, maybe you're wrong then. Maybe it was just poor luck and the group managed to get that big by its own efforts. Maybe, but we can't take that chance. After all, if a group had been managing to do something like this in secret for so long, they'd have to be good at hiding. It's just discouraging. So I'm hearing it would be a bad time to bring up the passive skill I got from my little demon organ transplant? Oh, infinite hells, what is it? Partial demonic body. Myriad let out a long, pained sigh. Just keep that one hidden on your card too, alright? Already doing it. Good. On a related note, I noticed you met with Zandale. Yes. Honestly, I can't thank you enough for setting up a meeting like that. Hopefully, they'll have an option that will mesh well with my current skill set. Just pick whatever you think is best, but try not to get your hopes up. There are plenty of skills you won't be able to acquire even with their help because of your affinities and attributes. Hey now, my attributes aren't that bad anymore. Not bad but not good either. You've mostly been raising the ones that were already above average when you got to this world. I'll admit it's good you were able to raise up your strength since coming here, but all you did was raise it from below average to the high end of what an average person might have. Combined with your terrible affinities, and you may be able to learn a quarter of the skills Zandale has available. UHG, the crushing reality of his god's words was inescapable, but he wouldn't let it get to him. A quarter of the available skills would still be dozens of options at least, maybe even over 100, and while the other apostle was here he could take advantage of their presence and his skill to create a library he could enchant from. Heck, he'd already started earlier when they were training Connect together. He'd need Falk to identify the skills for him since he couldn't determine them by feel alone, but his arsenal of abilities to enchant wish was about to explode, a fact that made him salivate as he thought of the possibilities. Well, it's good you have a decent mentality about it at least. One more thing before you wake up, you completed your quest, let's get you another one. Wait, really? I was a little curious about how I finished the priest job so fast. He had been under the impression he'd have to get Wedro to spread around the fact that the Apostle of Myriad had helped save them and kill a horde of demons, and since he hadn't been able to do that since he was unconscious he couldn't make that request. The gods watching knew you're my apostle. Having gained their approval for your acts as my representative in the world successfully completed it. Of course, the main reason for finishing your job has to do with just how many demons you killed, but let's get to the heart of the matter. Like previously, you could complete an achievement for 5 job levels or grow my faith to an additional 100 believers for 20, but you have a couple other options now as well. If you take charge and lead my believers to achieve a great goal, then I'll raise one of your skills up by 1 level, provided it's no more than level 3 already, and each of the believers will get a bonus of 3 job levels. Alternatively, if you succeed in an act that earns me a large amount of faith from a sufficient amount of non-believers, then I'll raise a skill level up by 1, so long as it's currently level 2 or lower. I'm into the new options, but they already feel a little vague. How many believers would I need to lead for the first option, and how many people would need to give you faith for the second? A minimum of 3 would work for the first, though there's no maximum. Of course, the more people involved, the greater the achievement would need to be. As for the second, at minimum you'd need around 50 people. Well, the rewards are good for the work at least, though I wish you could give me something as nice as Analia gave Thera. Analia is one of the more powerful gods in the world by virtue of just how many of her race she was able to save. There's no way I'd be able to give something on par with what she could. Lame, but okay. I'll think about it for now, but I'll leave it until I can find anything worthwhile, alright? Sounds good, it's better you take something you can accomplish. The stronger you get, the better it is for me after all. Ben woke up early and immediately read through the list of skills before heading off to Fox's shop. He was a little discouraged having gone through it. When Myriad had said he might have access to a quarter of skills, it looked like he was being optimistic. Ben did the math after reading through it all. He could only take advantage of 1 in 6. Interestingly, while it seemed like he could learn Zandale's 4 main skills, they and a variety of others would take upwards of half a year to gain, making it so he would only take the time to teach them if either the person looking to learn them had over 10 skills for Zandale to learn, or paid an outrageous fortune to make it worth his time, on top of traveling with the apostle for all of his business. Other than that, it seemed like Zandale was suited to the light, water, air and fire affinities, and as a result had multiple skills that required decent compatibility to get. What's more, they had a few non-affinity magics, but because of his low mana level it wasn't something he could get, no matter how much he wanted to. As always, my own magic remains out of my grasp, he thought sadly, and the other options weren't much better. There were a few mind skills he could learn since he had more than enough intelligence, but none of them stood out to him compared to the ones he already had, and he was pretty sure if he really wanted them he could gain them himself with only a little effort. As for combat skills, they frankly didn't interest him. He already got the 2 that could help with his crafting, and he already established he didn't like to fight like that, so why would he waste an opportunity to learn them? There were other ones that seemed like they might be convenient in his day-to-day life, but really it came down to not wanting to waste this opportunity on something he could do without or could get himself. Thankfully there was one that stood out to him. A single skill that shined bright in his mind that not only could he take based on his affinities, but also desperately wanted given how the world had seemed to want to treat him so far, and as soon as Zandale got into the shop he intended to ask for it. Until then, however, Ben had a different task. As he was leaving for the day yesterday, Fox mentioned to him he wanted him to come up with the items that Wedrow had requested for his friends after getting the chance to see them fight, and that if he was confident enough he could make them himself, though Fox would have to approve of them, and he jumped at the chance. Given the things he'd already gone through, he could only imagine how bad things must have been for Will and Steph, and since they didn't mention anything like that in their letters he had to assume it was too hard to talk about. Stay strong guys, your favorite craftsman is here to keep you safe. I'm certain they don't have it as bad as you think, his god chimed in. I mean sure, they're being properly paid for it, but they're being trained to be a powerful fighting force. If I could just keep wandering into situations worse than what they're being set out to do, wouldn't this universe be too unjust and cruel? He took his god's silence as agreement and got to work, pulling out the items he was going to use to make a weapon for Will from his spatial bag. At first, he'd thought of making a pair of brass knuckles since his friend focused on hand-to-hand combat, but with what he was going to use for materials, the chances of Will getting himself killed from handling them wrong was too high, which meant he'd have to go for a gauntlet instead. Ordinarily, he wouldn't make something like a gauntlet to be a weapon since they could be weighty and difficult to attack with, but given Will's strength stat they should work like a charm and he began planning it out. The first thing to do was make a sketch of all the smaller pieces he'd need. A gauntlet would need to be made up of multiple smaller plates to allow for some finger dexterity, while not so many that it would be hard to fix if anything happened. Like many things, proper balance was key. With that done, the next task would be melting down 2 different metals to make sheets he could cut and work into the shapes he needed, though there was some risk on his part so he needed to take extra care. After all, he would be using 2 of the ones he got from Thera's parents, some of the more usual that could suck out the mana of a creature that touched it, and the death stone that would absorb vitality. He carefully broke off chunks to get the quantities he needed, while taking care to make sure no slivers made their way onto any nearby table or the ground. While more usual was safe until he processed it, Deathstone was immediately dangerous and couldn't be touched with his bare hands. Should a large sliver of it get stuck under a person's skin, if they possessed a low enough vitality regeneration rate, there was a very real possibility they would slowly die, or at the very least be stuck in a state of perpetual sickness. Once that was done, he got both placed in a mold in the forge and began to blast the heat, working on the next step as he waited for them to melt down. Going into the storage room, he found an already prepared plate of steel and some pre-made chainmail that he intended to repurpose. Ordinarily he'd use leather to make the interior of a gauntlet like that, but Will was a lightning user. He wanted the energy of his attack to properly transfer without having to worry about it being weakened by something non-conductive, so he got to work making links within it so it would fit his friend's hands, only using a bit of leather when he felt that the chainmail would be too inflexible. His friend's comfort didn't need to be considered at least. Since he had the skill-tough skin, the metal rubbing against it couldn't do any harm. Once that was done, he pulled out the two metals which had melted down and let the death stone cool while he processed the Morabugel to activate its mana-sucking effects, holding his own hand above it as close as he could without actually touching the molten material and releasing his mana. It was all it would take to make the material align in a way that would allow its properties to shine, but he had to hold it there for a while and the heat stung his flesh. He made a mental note to ask Sonia to heal him when he got home and dealt with it until the metal cooled enough to handle, the processing being complete. That done, he cut out the shapes he would need from the two magic materials, as well as the ordinary steel, and got to work forge welding the safe steel to the backs of the more dangerous plates to protect his friend's hands before he got to work shaping each piece. Once that was done, he was left with a thing of beauty. Two gauntlets where the hands and palms were covered in Morabugel and deathstone plates, making any punch, choke, or slap exceptionally devastating for the enemy, and once he got Falk to put on the finishing touches it would be devastating. The parts that covered the arms were safe only by necessity. Wool would require some part he could safely hold to pull them on and off, but it wasn't a significant sacrifice. Crafting level increased. Oh hell yeah. Level 6 crafting baby. He cheered, thinking he was still alone. Congratulations, Zandale said, fixing him of that assumption. You must have made a particularly fine work. He turned to him embarrassed and found Falk there too. Ahem, sorry about that, I was a little excited. Don't worry about that, boy, let's see what pushed you over the edge, his teacher asked him, curiosity plain on his face. Ben placed them down so Falk could have a look, but made sure to give a proper warning. Just don't grab them by the hands, it won't be a pleasant experience. I can see that, he said with a low whistle. These are downright savage, I approve. Also you made it to mid-rare. Oh heck yes. He thought he'd be getting to low-rare considering the materials he'd used, but getting to mid-rare was even better. It was a shame he didn't have a crafting job for it, but his skill itself would still get some good experience from it. So these were for your friend, I take it? They'd be good to send as is, but were you going to attach any enchantments to it? I was actually hoping I could get you to do that. I was thinking you could add the strongest drain spell you could to the Deathstone pieces to enhance its effects and attach it so it would draw its power from any mana the Morabugel sucked out of his victims, as well as applying Harden and any other spells you think would enhance the longevity of the items. Well I don't mind, but you've already done such good work, you sure you want me to finish it? Especially with your fancy new rings and everything. My friend is going to be using these to protect himself. I'd much rather have you handle the enchantments since you'll be able to do it so much better than me at my current level. He had also been harboring the suspicion for a while now that some of Falk's skill levels were higher than he'd been told. If he was wrong it wouldn't make a difference, but if he was right the gauntlets would get a significant boost, and there was no harm in taking that chance. Falk couldn't see the thoughts in the back of Ben's mind, but he accepted. Alright, no harm for me since I'm the one who was commissioned anyway, but what about the item for the girl who was here? Got anything in mind for that? Yeah actually, but I'll need to do things backwards for that, he said, pulling the second last material he'd brought from his spatial bag. I was thinking I'd do something similar to the mithril I'd used for my jacket, but make a cloak instead and cover it with resistances to keep her safe. The only thing is, I can't work this myself. The material in question was orichalcum, a metal with such intense physical resistance that Ben had no actual way to work the metal himself. It would have to be done by magic, and even with his rings, trying it with his level of mana would take far too long, meaning he had to leave it to someone else, as disappointing as that was. Falk gave out a low whistle. I'll have to make it an alloy with something else to give it the flexibility you're looking for, but even then, combining that level of physical resistance with your magic resistances, it's gonna be quite the final product. Hey, nothing but the best for my friends. They discussed the details a bit longer before Falk got to work and Ben was able to direct his focus to Zandale. Sorry about that, didn't mean to keep you waiting. Not at all, as someone who only has the 3rd level in blacksmithing, that was all incredibly impressive. But with that done, have you found a skill that has grabbed your attention? When Ben had been going through the book of skills, it had Zandale's level in each too, and Ben was sure his smithing had been lower, but assumed it must have just not been updated recently. With so many skills to keep track of, nobody could be blamed if 1 or 2 slipped through the cracks. Besides, he had more important things to think about as a smile unconsciously formed across his face. I did, but you remember saying that if I had any other skills you didn't I'd be able to learn more. You have another skill? 2 others actually. Hidden mind and complex mind, technically he had 4, but he wasn't sure an apostle would be happy to have the chance to learn sacrilege, and he was pretty sure you needed a demon organ transplant to get partial demonic body, so he left those 2 out. No need to risk scaring Zandale off because of them. Hearing this, the tentacled creature took out his card, from where Ben couldn't say, and started scrolling through the information on it, checking to verify that he didn't have those skills. "Oh my," he said in astonishment. "I think it's been around 3 years since I found someone with that many skills I didn't already possess, but it looks like coming has been very profitable indeed." "In that case, have you found 3 skills you'd like to acquire?" "About that, there's only one I really want. There were very few skills that would be of more value to hold and train personally compared to just enchanting with them as far as he was concerned, but there was a different option he hoped to explore." "Would it be possible to get you to train 2 other people in a skill each?" "Of course, I've done such scenarios before and have no issue with it." "Excellent, in that case, fuck. Did you hear all that?" His teacher had been near enough to know what they were talking about, and Ben gave him a wide grin. Even if he didn't want to take him as a student initially, Ben felt he owed the man a great deal. He patiently taught him the best he could, helped him develop his ideas, and provided stability to his life when he was first making his own way in the world. Giving him the chance to learn a new skill was the least he could do. Fogg for his part seemed initially shocked, even slightly bashful from the offer, but turned his student down. "That's mighty kind of you, boy, it really is, but don't worry about me. While we were waiting for you to wake up, Zandale already taught me a skill in exchange for some smithing and enchanting lessons." He was a little disappointed but didn't let it get to him. There were other people in his life he cared about that he could help with this, and there would be other ways to show Fogg his thanks. He gave Zandale access to the connect skill so the other apostles' time wouldn't be wasted, and ran off to grab the 2 other people he thought would be able to take proper advantage of a gift like this, stopping by the clinic first to tell Sonia she needed to take a break to go to Fogg's shop, and going back home where he knew Thera was studying dark magic in her efforts to gain it, dragging her along without explaining anything, much preferring to make it a surprise. Once everyone was gathered, he explained exactly why they were there. "All right guys, Christmas came early this year and you 2 lucky ladies get to benefit." "What's Christmas?" Sonia asked, not understanding what he was saying at all, nor why she'd been asked to come. "A fantastic question. It's a holiday from my homeland that involves giving gifts to the people you care about. With the gift you'll be receiving is the chance to learn a new skill each from my fellow apostle, Zandale the Skill Master," he said, directing his hands to the lovely tentacled figure in the back of the shop. "Wait, you know the Skill Master?" Thera yelled out, while Sonia had a different concern. "Ben, you can't waste that much money on us." "Huh? What do you mean money?" Zandale answered for him. "I sell my services as a skill teacher at a high price for those who don't have skills to trade. A person can't live on knowledge alone after all." "Fair enough, but you guys don't have to worry about that. I have 3 skills they don't and only one I want to learn, so flip through this book and find something for yourselves." Thera happily took it and started flipping through the pages after thanking him, but Sonia was more hesitant. "Ben, this is too generous, you really should at least take 2 skills for yourself. I don't need one." "Nonsense. There are plenty of skills I just straight up can't learn, and of the ones I either don't want, am confident I could learn myself at a later date, or would make better use of by being able to copy an enchantment of it than actually having the skill myself. Rather than grabbing something I don't need, I'd rather give this to you as a thanks for giving me a place to stay and constantly patching me up." "I'm still not sure." "Just give it a look, Auntie, I'm sure there's something in here you would want," Thera said, waving Sonia to her. "There's so many options, I wouldn't be surprised if you could find something to help you at the town clinic as well." "Well, I guess it won't hurt to give it a look." "Thank you, Ben. Of course, hope you pick something good." With that done, Zandale got to the main point with Ben. "So what skill would you like? I'll transfer it to you right away and then we can focus on training it until you acquire it." I was hoping to get defense enhancement. He'd thought long and hard on it and was positive it was the one he wanted, but he felt Zandale's mood immediately change when he asked for that one in particular. "Are you sure? You did read the explanation on how you'd need to acquire it, didn't you?" "I did, and luckily for me, I happen to have 2 life affinity mages here in case things get too bad." Defense enhancement was a passive skill that would increase his overall defense against damage, both physical and magic. Given some of the thorough beating he'd gotten to enjoy since coming to this world, the skill stood out to him as soon as he saw it on the page, and after reading through all the other options it would be an easy choice. His magic defense was already excellent thanks to his natural resistances, but improving them would still be great since it only weakened their effects, even if it was to a significant degree. As for physical defense, seeing as how he currently had none, any improvement would be appreciated. Of course, there were drawbacks to it. He would need to keep getting injured to raise its level, a situation he wanted to avoid, no matter how common it might be, but he already had a solution. He'd known for a while that eventually the quests he would get from Myriad would start letting him raise his skills up, at least a little bit, and even if they wouldn't be easy, this was the skill he intended to raise. His connect and crafting skills were already way above the limits for the quests currently offered, and for many of his other ones he was sure he'd be able to raise them himself, but he didn't watch to raise this one through his own efforts. What use was a shield that got better after the beating was done? Of course, beatings were also why Zandale seemed hesitant as Ben grabbed a couple sturdy wooden bars from the back storage. The skill needed to be used to be acquired after all, and even if he'd be able to get it extremely fast thanks to the help of the skill master, it was still going to hurt. He handed them over to Zandale and took hold of his tentacle, feeling the 3 skills the apostle wanted to acquire being copied over, while Ben had the defense enhancement skill placed within him, and wasting no time, Zandale began hitting. It sucked. A lot. He felt bruises start forming all over him with every hit and wasn't sure if it was actually working, but forced it to continue, waving off Farah and Sonia when they saw what was happening. At the same time, he did his best to ignore the pain so he could practice his other skills to help Zandale acquire them, using Hidden Mind on himself to try and block the pain he was feeling from crossing over in the connection and instructing Zandale to try and put Hidden Mind up between his first mind and the second that formed from copying over Complex Mind, keeping one set of thoughts hidden while the other conversed with Ben's own to train Connect itself. Even if it just looked like Ben was receiving a one-sided beating, what was happening between them was very dense mentally, at least it was for a while before a certain blow got too painful. Ow, damn. Why did you just hit harder? I didn't, it looks like the copy of the skill ended, I'll reapply it. Give me a second first. It was good to know there was a noticeable difference at least, but his entire body ached and turned to his 2 friends with life magic for some help. Sonia rushed over, concern painted across her face, but Thera stopped her. Auntie, it would be better to get the skill before you help him so it doesn't go to waste. Oh, you found one? He asked, curiosity making it through the pain. Mana examination. It's appropriate for people with the light or life attribute and can make their healing magics more effective, she said, looking to Zandale who reached out and placed the skill on her before she got to work healing his battered body. It took some time, as most healing magic tended to on him, but it did seem quicker than usual overall, and after she was done she ran off back to the clinic to take full advantage of the skill's presence while she could, promising to come back when the skill effect ended as long as the clinic didn't need her. With her aunt gone, Ben turned to Thera. How about you, have you managed to find one that's caught your eye? I think so. Unlike Ben, Thera had plenty of options she could pick from. While Zandale didn't have any Earth-linked skills since they weren't suited for that affinity, there were plenty of skills for mages in general, and most importantly, there were non-affinited magics she could use to get closer to completing her quest. The only question was which she wanted. Of the many non-affinited magics, Zandale had 5, likely because the rarer options were significantly harder to learn, meaning she would be choosing between enchanting, strengthening, empathy, telekinesis, and corpse song. It was a shame some of the more interesting ones she'd heard of weren't available, but there were still good options within those. Right off the bat, though, she knew she wouldn't be taking enchanting or strengthening magic. She wanted to take something that would be useful to her, so enchanting was a no-go. It was probably the most common non-affinited magic there was, with every town having 1 or 2 users of the skill, but even if Thera tried she knew that she wouldn't have the control or patience for it, especially when she had both Ben and her uncle who were both extremely skilled in it. It would be a waste to get a skill she'd never level up. As for strengthening, there was a healthy amount of fear attached to the idea of her using it. It was a skill that involved running her mana through either herself or others to increase the amount of power that they could exert. The issue was, the items she constantly ran her mana through would explode, and she didn't want to take the risk of that happening either to herself or anyone else. She supposed it could be used as a weapon to use on monsters, but in the event any were able to handle it, she didn't want to imagine a creature having the sort of strength that could be created by the mana she could provide. The idea was more than a little horrifying. That just left 3 options: empathy, telekinesis, and corpse song. Empathy was only marginally worth considering because it was the active version of the skill instead of the passive that some races possessed, but there were still reasons to hesitate. As a skill that let the user feel the emotions of those around them, it didn't have much use to her personally, especially at lower levels. It was similar to the early levels of Ben's Connect skill in that way, though it didn't require physical contact to work, which was one of the larger reasons to hesitate. As it grew, it would potentially allow her to do things like focus in on a single target, or feel multiple targets from far away to form a mental map with, which could be exceptionally useful with their hunts, but in the beginning it would be uncontrollable, and combined with her mana that could be a nightmare. The thought of using it and immediately feeling the emotions of every resident of Stonewall was more than a bit worrying and cemented it as her last choice. Telekinesis was much better, letting her do what she already was doing with her magic, but not being limited to manipulating the earth alone. Of course it had its drawbacks. A person with earth magic and telekinesis wouldn't be able to shape things at a remotely similar level, at least for an average user, but given her lack of control, precisely shaping the earth she manipulated into different shapes was rarely her goal. The other issue was the significantly increased mana cost, but it was another moot point for her. As someone with a mana quantity above 200,000, a spell's mana consumption was ignorable to her, not something she ever bothered considering before casting her attacks. Aside from that, having both telekinesis and her earth magic presented some interesting ideas should she choose to learn it. Lastly, there was corpse song, a magic that tempted her by virtue of just how odd it was to see it as an option. It was probably one of the rarest non-affinited magics, beating out many other options that weren't available to Zandale like barrier magic, magic nullification, and scrying, with it coming to the world from only one race, as opposed to the other options that had been discovered independently on multiple worlds, and never gaining much popularity. Despite that, it was rather interesting in its own right. From what she understood, it was an ability that let the user essentially view the life and experiences of any dead body, with clarity increasing as the skill level went up. What surprised people most when they learned about it though was that it was neither death nor time affinitied, instead being powered by unflavored mana. As an option it was interesting, and she could see how it could help in her hunting if she could read a dead beast's recent memories to find other targets, but it was most appealing as a curiosity. Still, she wouldn't get a chance like this again and needed to focus on what would be best for her, not just to complete her quest, but also in the long term as well, and it was with that mindset she made her choice. I'll learn telekinesis. Ben got home, exhausted after a long day and knowing there was still more to do. He hadn't managed to gain the skill on the first day, and neither had Thera. Zandale at least had managed to get both Connect and Hidden Mind, though they would still try to use their skills as a way to try and level up Connect faster while still in town, and they had yet to acquire Complex Mind. Of everyone, Sonia had been the luckiest, gaining mana examination after only her second time getting Zandale's help. Ben couldn't help but be a little jealous of her after a long day of getting beaten up, but it looked like she'd gone all out preparing dinner since she was home before them, and the chance to dig in went a long way to ease his mood, especially knowing he was going to be up for a while. "Hey Sonia, mind if I move everything out of the living room for the night? There's something I want to try," he asked as the meal ended, confusing the other two at the table. "I guess it's not an issue if you put everything back after, but what are you doing?" Hesitation and curiosity were plain in her voice, but he did have a good reason. "I was hoping it would be cool if I put a large-scale enchantment on the room." "Wait, you want to enchant an entire room? Who does that?" Thera asked, surprised. Enchantments were something that were put on items, the idea of putting one on an entire room was ridiculous. Aside from the level of patience it would take to do, there was also the whole issue of powering it. It just wasn't reasonable to supply mana to something that size. Sonia seemed mildly worried but held enough trust in Ben that she accepted it. "I suppose that would be alright, but what were you hoping to accomplish doing something like that?" "One part is to get a couple levels on my new job. As for the other, well, it's a bit of a surprise, but trust me, if it works, then the payoff's going to be great." The answer filled neither of the women with confidence, but considering how much he'd done for them today, they gave him their trust as he emptied the living room of all of its furniture and got to work. The idea had come to him when he'd quickly thrown together a resistance amulet for Zandale so he could touch Thera to transfer the skill over. It started as a question really, what would happen if the enchantment for it was placed on an entire room? The answer to which was nothing really. Anyone within would be safe from the passive effects from any charm leaking in from the outside, but sufficiently thick and sturdy walls were able to block it to an extent anyway. Theirs was powerful enough to create issues despite that, but Falk had apparently reinforced the outer walls of the house when she'd moved in, just to be safe. Still, that meant an enchantment of that size wouldn't actually help anyone in the room if the charm user was there as well, but what if it could? The enchantments on the amulets were set up in a way that they covered the user, but what if they were made to fill a given space instead? Would it have any effect? It was worth a try at least, and he wanted to see how far he could take the idea, so he got to work. Having 3 minds at his disposal capable of enchanting in tandem had the potential to make the entire task significantly quicker than it otherwise would, but as per usual when he tried something big, he was limited by his low mana. At least he could finally train it a bit more efficiently, thanks to having a job that gave it a bonus, but it would still be a while before he made it into the lower end of what was considered average. All he could do for now was construct the enchantment slowly and let the hours pass. He let himself get lost in the work, planning the most optimal locations to lay his enchantment and weaving them to reduce the overall mana cost as much as he could to ensure he could get the most out of how he intended to power it. It was still more efficient than when he'd created the one for Thera's arm brace at least. By having 2 minds dedicated to enchantment construction and one focused on regulating the mana cost, he was able to increase the speed by quite a bit. That didn't change that it was going to take all night to finish, but it did mean he wouldn't be late to the shop at least. He worked away patiently, in hindsight regretting that he started with the largest of rooms in the house, but eventually it was done. Enchanting level increased. Focus level increased. He looked to his card and smiled. He thought he might get a level up to enchanting after all this, but getting focus was a nice bonus too, not to mention all of the job experience that went towards enchanting. Even better was the fact that this meant all of his blessed skills as well as connect had reached the level where most people stopped raising them up. It was hard to keep putting in unending effort after all, and each level required more than the last, but he had no intention to settle there. Especially when considering how easy his next few jobs would be for him. He was far above the skill level one would typically take enchanter at, so the job experience would come faster and easier. And the same was true of the 2 crafting path jobs he would need to take if he wanted to unlock high crafting. There were a few others out that were available to him now, or would be in the near future that he was curious about too, but he was getting ahead of himself and got back to finishing up the final bits of the task at hand. Grabbing his bag, he pulled out an item he'd made ahead of time at the shop. It was about the size of a pack of playing cards, and he marveled at how little he needed to power an enchantment like this. It was such a simple thing, a small block of rainbow mana crystal that was set in some processed morabusial to extract the mana contained within, as well as a small plate of it across the front to do the opposite, pulling mana into the crystal at a quicker rate to ensure it didn't run out. The entire setup may have been overkill, but he didn't want to take his chances, considering how bad it could be if they trusted the enchantment and failed, and he attached it to a section of the wall he was confident no one would accidentally touch, placing the power source at the start and end of the enchantment. All done? Sonia asked as she walked into the room after waking up. Yep, I'd say it was quite productive. So are you ready to say what you were trying to do? Sure I guess, he said after a bit of thought. I won't be able to test it until later when Thera's up, but I wanted to see if I could neutralize her charm in a given space by inverting the enchantment on a resistance amulet. Won't know if it worked until she's up though. Her eyes widened slightly upon hearing just what he'd been attempting, and she let out a small chuckle. This and helping her get a new magic skill, you're really going all out for her first birthday as her fiancé, aren't you? Wait, her what? He asked, thinking he misheard her. Did she not tell you it was soon? For that matter, do your people celebrate such things? She didn't, and we do. How far off is hers? It's a week from today, but you don't need to worry too much, you've done plenty. Of course I need to worry, do you have anything planned for it? He couldn't believe he was just hearing about it now, and with such little time to prepare. He wasn't sure how succubi celebrated such things, but he wanted to do something for her if that was the case. We don't have too much planned. I bought a few books to gift her, and I believe Falk has something for her too, but you know how things are. This will be the first year she has a friend to spend it with too. I thought she might mention it herself, but it looks like that might have been too much to hope for, Sonia said, regretting not bringing it up sooner. No, I was injured for a while, so even if she wanted to she probably didn't have the chance, he bemoaned, cursing the timing of everything. I'll think of something to do for her and get your advice on it later. Another thing on his ever-growing list of stuff to do, but this just shot straight to the top. Thera sat in the training grounds, staff outstretched as she focused on using the skill placed on her. Telekinesis felt similar enough to how she used her earth magic, to the point that she worried she was using it by mistake, especially since she had no choice but to use it with raw earth. It may have been a skill that would let her move anything through mana, but the training ground near town didn't have anything in the way or trees or water, so she had no choice but to practice with dirt as she always did. At least after a couple days of using it, she felt like she was getting the hang of the skill and had gotten to feel the difference from her typical magic of choice. This was only at the Zeroth level after all, and she could feel the mana drain significantly more compared to her earth magic. Unfortunately, since the level was low, her control was far worse and it took longer to pull together her spell than she'd expected. All she'd been doing to practice was pulling the earth from the ground to throw it. Anyone watching would assume she was just practicing her earth magic, but unfortunately her options were limited when it came to ways of training the skill. If she had a normal level of magic control, she'd be able to practice in a smaller way, maybe making cutlery fly around her home or something similar, but for now she had to take the options she had. At the very least, when it came to her earth magic, she believed she was feeling the results of gaining multiple magic skills her god had mentioned to her since gaining life magic, though it was hard to be sure since her earth magic leveled up at the same time. Still, she thought she'd know for sure when she could test it against the effects of having gained telekinesis, and feeling that she was almost out of time before she'd need to go back to have it applied again, went for a final push, throwing her lump of earth as far as she could and feeling her staff shatter in the process. No longer anything to be concerned about since her mother had promised to back her, she didn't give its destruction a second thought, instead trying one last thing since the effects of the magic were still with her. Using her earth magic, she gathered dirt from across the ground into a ball. This was already an improvement over her skill in the past. Before, if she lost her staff, she could maybe raise a cloud of dirt into the air for a few moments and do nothing with it. Now though, she could actually shape it into a proper sphere, even if it was still far too large and she couldn't do anything but have it hover in the air. This amount of growth though was what made her choose to learn telekinesis of all the available options, and with an effort used it with her earth magic to throw her oversized earth bullet as far as she could. It only traveled about 15 meters, but it was enough. Even though it couldn't go far, the size alone made it a threat to anyone unfortunate to be in its way, and she'd finally have a way to fight if her staff broke. Acquired skill telekinesis level 0. Perfect timing. She thought to herself excitedly, a smile hidden by the hood of her cloak. With only a few minutes left before it wore off and with her staff broken, receiving the skill now was more than she could have hoped for, and she rushed back to the shop where Ben and Zandale were still training to let them know. Good news, she called out as she opened the shop door. I got the skill. That's great, Ben said, or at least he tried to. He still hadn't gotten his own skill yet, so he was laying on the floor being hit by Zandale, and it interfered with any conversation. She couldn't imagine what any customers thought walking into this, but then again the place already had a rough image from her uncle's initial demeanor and occasional rough handling of problemed clients, so she tried not to give it too much thought and left him to it, but Ben got up and stopped her. Hey, sorry, Thera, I have a bit of an awkward request and I was hoping you could help me out. Need me to hit you two to try and speed things up? Please no. I have a guy who's going to be here soon to pick up some dark resistance amulets. Any chance you'd be willing to stick around so they could be tested out? She couldn't help but grimace a bit. As far as requests went, it was minor. All she would need to do was stand around and show her orders didn't affect them while wearing it. Considering that she'd just gotten a new magic skill thanks to him, not to mention his current attempt to charm-proof the entire house, making it so her aunt would be able to have guests over without worry, and updating the enchantment on her brace, he'd done a lot for her this week. Actually, hasn't he done too much? When's he have time to sleep? Thinking about it like that, how could she refuse? It would just be a little unpleasant, nothing she hadn't had to deal with before. Alright, sure. How long until they get here? Should only be a couple minutes. She resolved herself to wait as Ben continued to take a beating off to the side until the shop door opened again and a nervous-looking man walked in. He appeared to be a cross between a lizard man and an elf, his eyes darting around the room as Ben got up to greet him. Perfect timing, Ben said, walking past him and locking the shop door so nobody else could accidentally walk in before handing over an amulet. Thera's here, so let's get this done quick. Are you sure this will work? he asked, giving her a fearful look before averting his eyes. Yes, I've made plenty and never had any issues. Now stop being a rude baby about it and let's get started. Thera took that as her cue to begin and took off her cloak before giving a few different orders to try and compel the man to bend to her will. With each one that failed he grew more and more relaxed until he was assured enough that she could stop and put her cloak back on. What a stupid man. She thought. If my charm had worked, he wouldn't be able to be afraid of me as soon as I took off the cloak. Well, it looks like it works like you said, the man awkwardly told Ben, seeming a bit calmer. It should be acceptable to take your deal. Ben shoved a bag into his hands and all but forced him out of the shop once he had his agreement. In that case, make sure you have everything ready. I'm sure there's plenty to prepare for everyone, so best get on it. Once they were alone again, Thera couldn't help but question his behavior. Is that really how you should treat a customer? What sort of deal are you making with him anyway? Oh, just going to supply him with some resistance amulets. Thanks for helping me make the sale, I owe you one. Well, considering everything else, I guess it's not so bad, just don't make it a common thing. She didn't seem thrilled to be used like that, Myriad said as he was waiting in the evening. I know, I wouldn't have chosen to do things that way either, but since they wouldn't just trust my work I had to do something. Hopefully, the surprise is better than any unpleasantness she had to deal with. And if they act out during your little surprise? Are you kidding? If they do, I'm raising hell. With the amount I'm paying, I refuse to let them be anything but perfect. He was already in a bad mood from a few days of beatings with no success at gaining the defense enhancement skill. He'd managed to level up both Hidden Mind and Calculate in that time, which eased his pain a little bit, but being free from this particular training would be far more desirable. He knew it wouldn't be easy, especially given that some of his attribute values left the skill at just the edge of something he could attain, and he was more than willing to act out a bit as a stress relief if things were bad enough. Of course, he wouldn't so long as the people he hired did what they were paid to. He didn't want to be a jerk to them, he just wouldn't accept anyone acting in a way that would upset Thera given the roles he was hiring them for. Alright. As an aside, maybe you should take a day off from trying to get that skill. It seems to be stressing you out. I'll be more stressed if I draw it out longer than I need to. Hopefully, I'll get it in the next day or two, just need to be patient. Very well. Speaking of patience, think he's going to show? Since he stopped by long enough to say he would be a couple days late, I don't see why he wouldn't. He did seem a bit stressed himself though. Quillith had shown up on the day they were supposed to meet just long enough to tell him there was an emergency and he'd be delayed a few days, something Ben didn't argue. From what his god had heard when listening in on them before, it sounded like he had some significant problems on his own world. With that in mind, a delay in him learning how plumbing worked wasn't something he'd hold against the little alien, even if he wanted the distraction. Still, to keep himself from dwelling on the past few days, he chatted with Myriad as he waited to distract himself, asking some questions related to parts of his god's blueprints he was struggling with understanding while he'd visit Myriad's realm, as well as get updated on how the various other believers were doing, spitballing ideas between the two on how to increase the faith as a whole. As they drew blank after blank on that particular topic, Quillith finally revealed himself. My apologies about the delay, he said as he arrived, looking completely indifferent to being there. It's no worries, I've been out of commission long enough that it only really feels like a week since I've seen you anyway. Indeed, my superiors were curious about whether we'd be free of doing your research for you earlier than expected given the severity of your injuries. Universes with mana equivalents can allow for more interesting potential than they first appear, especially when it comes to something like the adaptation of specialized organs to a foreign body. Seeing its success has given us much to consider. It's not like I didn't already think I was being watched by you guys, but between interdimensional aliens and gods staring down on me, I need a tinfoil hat or something. It can't be helped that this world and its summoned would receive a lot of attention, the Grey said with a shrug. We've spent almost a millennia peering into other universes, and of the small fraction that allow for the existence of life, this is the first we've seen that is able to interact with other realities to a greater extent than our own. To pull in 200 people from 10 different universes is a feat we couldn't replicate with nearly 1,000 years of experience on the subject. I'm not going to argue it doesn't sound impressive, but it was just our souls pulled over. I don't get the impression they're huge or unwieldy. Don't underestimate the weight of a soul, he warned, sounding surprisingly serious, before getting to the matter at hand. Of course, we aren't here to discuss theology, no matter how relevant it may be to you personally. As I warned, our information regarding weapon and communication technology for this world is still developing, but I got you what you wanted to know as far as plumbing goes. Hope you're ready to be up for a while and take some notes, this is going to be a lot. He was in fact very ready to take notes and got to work as Quillith began reading from his own, explaining how plumbing systems were managed on Earth as far as they could learn, with the reason behind not teaching Ben how Greys would manage their water being that aside from their race making use of it in different ways compared to humans, their technology to do so was different enough given how advanced they were even when compared to his own people that the replication difficulty would spike significantly, and there were a few aspects of it where minor physical laws might leave it impossible to replicate. At least on Earth, they relied enough on gravity and pressure to get things done that it seemed likely it would be replicable with minor changes. As Ben took his notes and listened with one mind, the other two were devoted to trying to come up with solutions for the various problems presented. Since his main goal was to be able to have the occasional shower every now and then instead of having to rely on washing up with a bucket of water, the main issues that he could immediately spot were getting the water itself, applying pressure so that it would run, heating it, and dealing with wastewater. Heating and pressure he was pretty sure he'd be able to manage with both fire and water enchantments. The main thing would be to design them in a way that the intensity of both could be controlled to match the user's preferences, and to ensure they had an external power source so nobody would run the risk of suffering mana exhaustion and drowning in a shallow puddle. The other two were a bit harder to figure out. Since Stonewall wasn't a modern city like from his world, it wasn't like water was pumped in from anywhere. There were multiple large wells around the town could draw from if need be, and many people had a magic tool that could draw water from the air. So long as the users made sure to fill it with mana in both the morning and evening they could have a steady supply at home, but that wouldn't be enough for what he wanted. There was always the option of drilling down into the ground to access the same water as the wells, but that wasn't exactly an easy thing to manage, and it also related to the final problem. What exactly would he do with the wastewater? If he thought about who might use it, he didn't think that he, Farah, or Sonia were so dirty they might contaminate the groundwater if it was just dumped, and it was what people would do with their wash buckets anyway, but he still wanted to find a better way, especially since he wanted to make it right. After a couple hours of dedicated note-taking, Ben finished everything Quillith had to tell him. Of course, it will need some experimentation by you to work, so we're hoping you'll share the results you get as you go if you learn anything. If you're already watching me, what's the point in repeating it for you? Just 'cause we can see what you do doesn't mean we can hear what you think. Make things a little easy on us, would you? Fair enough, he told the alien with a shrug. But don't expect anything too exciting. I'm already pretty sure I'm going to have to cheat a lot of this by using enchantments and some magic materials to make it work, not exactly anything groundbreaking. All knowledge is useful when trying to understand the principles a universe is built upon. Speaking of though, with that out of the way, did you have any questions you'd want us to try and bring you answers to next month? Ben gave a shake of his head, feeling regretful he hadn't been able to think of any for the second time the alien had come to meet him. Being knocked out for a couple weeks messed up my sense of time pretty bad, so I forgot to think of any in time. Come next month and I'll have a few for you. He expected the Grey to leave it at that, but instead, he offered Ben a suggestion. In that case, what about the opportunity to learn some foundational material science from us? I expect it would be handy for a craftsman to learn some of the underlying principles of the natural elements and how they might be extracted. He thought about it for a moment. It seemed like a good suggestion, if not for the obvious problem. I'm not against it, but none of the materials here would be the same as the ones in your universe, would they? How are you going to teach me anything? Well, for one, these are basic experiments we're having various nations testing to figure out so we can instruct you on the results, but also a large part of what I was thinking of teaching you was the principles on how to go about discovering the information yourself. The fact that we don't have a complete list of the physical elements that make up the world, as well as their properties and how they relate to each other, is an inconvenience we want solved. If teaching you this can help us learn anything faster, then it would be a bonus all around. Well, I'm not sure if I'd end up doing any basic research like that, but sure, I don't have any issue learning that sort of stuff, and it sounds like it could end up being handy. I'll take your offer and see you in a month. Sounds good, the alien said, standing there as if waiting for something else. A fact Ben chose to ignore. Anyway, I need to get some sleep for the few hours I can. Don't stress if you have anything that makes you a little late, and I'll see you in a month. With that, Ben got in bed and turned his small lamp off to send the point home, making Quillif leave soon after. Seems like that might have been a little rude. Maybe, but if he wants to say something he can come out and say it. I feel like if I ask, I'll just get dragged into whatever problems he has. You never did ask him what was going on at his homeworld that made him late, did you? No, and I'm not going to. As flattering as it is that they think I might eventually have the potential to help them if my skills grow more and are dealing with my requests to sweeten the deal, I'm already worried about one world's future. I don't want to bother with a second. Thera sat down in her living room, focusing intensely on the mana within herself. As annoying as it was to have dealt with her and a week ago, she couldn't deny that for once Vividus had been useful to her. Neither she nor Funa had considered that she'd never experienced dark mana in its natural state, but now that she had, she was aware of the subtle differences between it and the charmed dark mana within her. Funa had told her that she would either need to stop her mana from being charmed before it could be or to remove it after, but given what Vividus explained, stopping it from being charmed might not even be possible currently. If the mana was being charmed within her soul, she didn't know how to interact with it at that point without doing something crazy like getting the help of the soul mage, but that was all but impossible, meaning she'd have to focus on removing the charm when it left her soul. That at least meant she wouldn't be wasting her time trying both options and hoping one would work anymore, but it still wasn't an easy feat. The little help she had was that now she could feel the subtle difference from how her mana was compared to how it should be, and with as much focus as she could muster she worked on removing her charm from it. She'd had her first success a few days prior, but she hadn't been able to remove enough to hope to do anything with it, and before she knew it she'd lost it, feeling it disperse amongst all of the other mana flowing from her. Disappointing as it felt, nonetheless it was still major progress. Every day since then, she'd done a little more, gotten a little better, and today she wouldn't stop until she was able to achieve a spell. She felt her dark mana gather, little by little as she devoted herself to her task, not letting a bit of it get lost in the chaos that was her charmed mana. It was slow, tedious, and mentally exhausting. She felt sweat form on her brow as all of her mental energy was spent trying to achieve her goal, but she was getting there. It was hard to tell how much time had passed. She knew she wasn't quick at this from her previous attempts, but she was able to gather more pure dark mana during any other time and she was straining to keep it in one place within herself. If she didn't succeed now she never would, so she pressed on and tried to form a spell. She went with what Funa had suggested all those months ago and devoted herself to creating darkness fog, doing her best to assign the characteristics of the spell to the mana, not letting it leave her control until every aspect of it was perfect, and when she could hold on no longer, released the spell. All at once, light vanished from the room, as if it was a moonless night that not even the brightest of fires could illuminate. If anyone had been with her they might have feared they'd suddenly gone blind, their eyes failing them without reason and trapping them in an eternal darkness, but Thera could only feel elated, and all the more so for the notifications going off in her head. Acquired skill Dark Magic level 0. Quest Magical Growth completed. Select 1 skill below the 5th level to increase. It would be impossible for her to suppress the smile stretched across her face hearing that. She'd done it. She'd completed the quest she'd gained through the kindness of her god, and now it was time to claim her reward. She clasped her hands in prayer and spoke aloud. I humbly request a level to my earth magic. Rewarded with 1 level to earth magic. Max level of the earth mage job achieved. Her eyes opened wide in shock. She knew that some of the most significant gains in job experience could come from leveling up job-specific skills, but she hadn't thought she'd been close enough for this to push her over the edge, especially so quickly after gaining her last job. Then again, she hadn't checked her card in a while to see any changes that had occurred. Since her last job she had been practicing her magic during her hunts, and thanks to her level-ups in her skills and Ben making better and better staves she was able to regularly use more spells at a greater complexity than she ever had before, not to mention what was sure to be massive gains from killing the invader back then. This reward was just as much a bonus as actually completing her quest. The darkness that filled the house was beginning to clear up, so she wasted no time throwing on her cloak and rushing to the guild. It was never good to wait on these things, especially when putting it off meant potentially missing out on valuable experience. She made it through the guild without any problems, though was a little disappointed to learn Ankh had the day off and couldn't chat, so she made her way to the job room, placing her hands on the crystal within and letting the options fill her mind. Available jobs. Queen of Mana. Musician. Professional dancer. Bard. Darkness Mage Charm Specialized. True Mage. Life Mage. Healer. Telekinetic Mage. Dark Mage. High Earth Mage. Seeing just how many mage jobs she had available to her left her giddy. How could she not be? Since she had already completed the apprentice path, all of her magics would be getting a bonus already, which meant she could access the main mage-type jobs for each of her skills. It meant that even if she were to ever run out of options on the Earth Mage path, she would have other areas she could focus on magic-wise, and it would still help her control as a whole. She looked over each new option and weighed them carefully. She had expected most of them to be there, though healer came as a surprise. From what she knew, it was a job that showed up after one had enough knowledge of medicine as a whole, something she did not possess, but assumed it must have been an option for her as a result of having both life magic and her knowledge skill. She wouldn't be taking it this time or even next, but it was worth considering in the further future. Looking at the options, it really just came down to either High Earth Mage or True Mage. High Earth Mage was straightforward enough. It was a continuation of the Earth Mage job path, one that would focus on providing benefits to that magic alone. It should have been the obvious choice for her. She'd only wanted to work on that magic for the longest time, everything else was just to aid her in growing it. But that was the issue. Growing her other magics would make Earth magic easier to use as well, which meant she had to at least consider True Mage. It was a mage path that would grant bonuses to all of a person's magic skills, in her case for better or for worse. While anyone else who practiced multiple mage skills would take it without thought, she had to consider the fact that it would provide bonuses to her charm magic as well. She was already getting bonuses to it from when she'd taken the apprentice mage job, and as Funa had warned her, increases to her dark magic as a whole could also increase her level of charm if she kept at it. It probably meant she couldn't take dark mage either in the future if she wanted to avoid that, and right now she had probably already gained experience to the skill by gaining dark magic. Did she want to risk making it worse by getting even more bonuses to it? To take the chance to try and grow her magics as a whole or to focus in on the one she cared about most, that was the question. Still, there was no reward without some risk, so she decided to take one, just this once. Acquired job, True Mage LV0. Bonuses granted to improving mana recovery rate, and intelligence. All magics and any related skills will receive a growth bonus. Name, Thera Oris. Race, Succubus/Spirit Hybrid. Titles, Spirit Child. Jobs, True Mage, LV0. Previous jobs, Beginner Dancer, Apprentice Mage, Earth Mage. Attributes. Vitality, 1003. Vitality recovery rate, 10 per hour. Mana, 255,639. Mana recovery rate, 30 per minute. Strength, 105. Agility, 333. Stamina, 264. Intelligence, 243. Affinities. Light, 4. Life, 22. Fire, 11. Water, 14. Air, 12. Earth, 103. Death, 3. Dark, 43. Space, 2. Time, 1. Resistances. Light, 5. Life, 9. Fire, 11. Water, 16. Air, 12. Earth, 35. Death, 13. Dark, 42. Space, 7. Time, 8. Blessed skills. Earth Magic LV5. Charm Magic LV1. Passive skills. World Speak Plus. Coordination LV3. Medical Knowledge LV1. Bind. Active skills. Calculate LV1. Dance LV4. String Instrument LV3. Woodwind Instrument LV2. Cleaning LV1. Staff Wielder LV0. Meditation LV2. Speed Reading LV2. Life Magic LV0. Telekinesis LV0. Dark Magic LV0. Blessings. Anilia's Blessing. Trials. Trial of Analia and Talona. New job selected, she let herself breathe a small sigh of relief. A part of her had worried that upon taking the job her charm would level up immediately, something that had the power to instantly destroy her mood if it ever occurred. Despite any immediate negative consequences to her choice though, she was a little disappointed that no skill came with the job change. She knew that sort of thing only happened occasionally, but she couldn't help but hope one day something like magic control might fall into her lap, if only she were lucky enough for such a skill to exist, but really any new one would be nice. Still, she had gotten what she'd come for and nothing disastrous had happened. With so much occurring throughout the day, she figured it would be nice to treat herself by putting a pause on all of her practice to sit down with a book and relax, especially given what day it was for her. You can't be serious. When she had gotten home she'd thought she'd get to relax for a bit until dinner while everyone was out, but Ben was home early and laying on the ground, looking like he'd been beaten half to death. "Hey Thera, I wasn't expecting you to be out. Mind fixing me up?" he asked, sounding surprisingly upbeat considering his poor condition. Every day that he'd been working on getting the skill, he'd asked her to heal him for her own training, with Sonia correcting whatever side effects her overwhelming mana caused after the fact. "You sure you don't want to wait until Sonia gets home? If I feel too off, I'll just go to the clinic after, but I'm sure you'll be able to manage without it being too bad. You did keep me alive before without any issues, right? I kept you alive long enough for Steph to heal the disaster my magic made of your body. Maybe have a little less trust in me. Hey, you need someone to practice on, right? Besides, if you don't improve then I won't get the benefit next time something tries to eat me." "The last one didn't try to eat you," she said as she placed her hands on his bruises, letting her mana flow through him as she got to work. "We don't know that for sure, you stopped it first. Just think, a few more bites and I might gain something like flavor enhancement. There's no such skill. It will be a passive effect of course, making me more savory every time something gets a taste. If that's even possible, that is. Given the way creatures want to go at me, there's a chance I'm already at peak flavor potential. Yes, I'm sure you're delicious. So what has you in such a good mood, given how beat up you are?" He had been far less cheerful the last few days while being healed and took it as a sign of something good at least, and she was spot on. "I finally got defense enhancement, my torture ends today," he told her, absolutely brimming with cheer. "With that all done Zandale is heading off home tomorrow and my body can finally know some peace. Except for when it comes to leveling the skill. We aren't thinking about that today." She gave off a small chuckle before telling him everything that had happened with her as well. From gaining a skill, completing her quest, and getting a new job, her day had been almost overwhelmingly positive. "Dang, that's excellent. Wish my birthdays were that productive." He said it kindly and was clearly happy for her, but she felt awkward when it was spoken aloud. "You heard? I live with your aunt and work with your uncle, of course I heard. Was it supposed to be a secret?" "No, not really, I just never see much point in bringing it up. I can't do much for it like others can, so it's just a night in," she told him with a shrug. Sure, it was nice celebrating with her family, and whether she was with her mother or her aunt, there was always a good meal to go with it, but it also served as a reminder that she wasn't like others. She couldn't simply go somewhere to celebrate for fear she'd charm everyone around her, so in the end she didn't give it much thought, instead trying to let the day pass while enjoying whatever her family ended up planning. "Well, I'm here so let me change into something nice and we'll have some fun until Sonia and Fock arrive. I'm sure I'll be able to keep you entertained for a couple hours at least." It turned out the entertainment Ben had in mind was board games, and lots of them. While their house had loamage to play for whenever they got bored, it seemed he'd decided to take the time to recreate a few from his own world and made sure to carefully explain the rules of each before cracking them open and giving them a go, the result of which being Ben's total defeat. "Hey Thera, how is this possible?" he asked, voice full of exhaustion. "It's not like I thought you didn't have a chance at any of them, but I figured I'd at least win the first rounds for sure while you were getting the hang of them. To not have a single victory, am I under some sort of curse?" She patted his shoulder and tried to console him. There, you did your best and they were a lot of fun, we should play them again sometime. They really were enjoyable, no worse than any of the other games the world had to offer." Both checkers and chess felt like they could be simplified versions of loamage, but even more interesting were the cards. With so many games that could be played if you owned a set, she didn't doubt they were as common on his world as he'd led her to believe. "Well, we can play whenever you want, they're all yours. Happy birthday, Thera." She wasn't sure what to say. It was the first time she'd received a gift from a friend on her birthday, at least someone she could consider a genuine friend. In the past, she'd received things from the children of government officials working under her mother, but she could always see the fear in their eyes and she'd hated it. Receiving a gift from Ben who was smiling at her, even if he seemed wrung out from defeat after defeat, was infinitely more touching, and she felt a blush spread to her cheeks. Ben for his part didn't give her time to say anything. Anyway, enough time should have passed. Put on something nice, and let's go meet with Falk and Sonia. Aren't they just coming here? It's a surprise. Now come on, throw on whatever you think looks good and we'll be on our way. She felt genuinely confused about what they could possibly be doing, but did as she was asked and went to her room, thinking they might be eating at her uncle's home instead, as odd as that would be. Still, it would be nice to dress up for it. She had a few nicer outfits, but they were only worn occasionally while at home. If she went out, there was a greater than not chance she'd ruin it either by training or by hunting, so most of the time she had something old and comfortable on under her cloak. She ended up going with a light blue shirt with some nicer black pants, before throwing her cloak back on and meeting Ben back in the living room. He'd changed earlier, going from his worn-out shop clothes to a plain black shirt and pants, but it was a nice look and he quickly dragged her out of the house. She hadn't realized just how dark it had gotten after she'd worked on treating Ben's bruises and playing a few hours of games, but it was clear the sun would set soon and she just hoped Sonia and Falk wouldn't have been waiting long. The only issue was she had no clue where they were going. Her uncle's house was in the other direction and that was her only guess. With all of her questioning being fruitless, Ben just kept brushing her off. Seeing no use in that, she tried to just enjoy the evening stroll through the town. Almost all of the shops were closed by this point and the streets were peaceful and quiet as dusk began to fall. They spoke about their plans for the next week and where they thought they might hunt next. Ben asked for menu suggestions, while she was hoping some traveling merchants that were due to come through would have some new books available. It was nice to just walk around and chat with someone she cared about. It felt normal, and before she knew it, Ben came to a stop. Alright, here we are. She had stopped paying attention to where they had been going eventually, but looking up found themselves in front of one of the few restaurants the town had, and the nicest one at that. If we're grabbing takeout, I think they close around this time, she told him, thinking about how good the food was the few times her aunt brought some home for them. Ben just gave out a small laugh. Something like that. Come on, let's go in. She worried about bothering anyone when they would be so close to closing, but found the restaurant empty save for the staff, as well as Falk and Sonia sitting at a table within. Ben, what's going on? He didn't answer, instead walking her to the table and pulling a chair for her. Here, take a seat, I'll take your cloak. You know that's not happening. I made sure everyone here has resistance amulets, so there's nothing to worry about. What? Just relax and enjoy the restaurant experience. She looked to her aunt and uncle, who nodded at what Ben was saying and after a bit of hesitation did as she was asked. There was no change in the staff as she looked around, so she let herself relax a bit before turning to everyone around her. Alright, what's going on? Celebrating your birthday, of course, her uncle answered. Okay, but why here? It was Ben's idea, Sonia said, turning to Ben and expecting him to go on. It's nothing crazy. You said you liked the food here before, so I just figured you might like the chance to try out eating at the actual restaurant and enjoy it fresh. Anyway, we rented the place for a few hours, so don't worry about it and let me know what's good on the menu. Wait, renting out an entire restaurant isn't nothing. She yelled, ignoring Ben's request. This is nice, it really is, but you guys shouldn't spend so much. Well, Falk and I didn't actually contribute to this at all, Sonia told her. Ben just panicked a bit when he found out he only had a week to figure out what to do for your birthday. So you made all of those games on top of arranging all of this? It really wasn't that much, so don't worry about it. By the way, is anyone going to judge if I order 2 meals for myself? Everything here sounds great, so I can't decide. You know, you could just ask to try some of ours instead of stuffing yourself, her uncle told him with a sigh. Oh, I fully plan on grabbing some bites of whatever you all order too. I'll go last so my orders don't double up at all. I can't believe this, Dara muttered to herself as she looked over the menu. It was kind and sweet and altogether too much. Even if it had to be done once the restaurant was supposed to be closed, wasn't this the sort of outing she'd long stopped hoping to have for her birthday? Just a day of normalcy that anyone else could enjoy, going out and celebrating with the people she cared about. Now that she was here, what was she supposed to do? As Ben and her uncle kept talking about food, her aunt took her hand and lightly leaned in to whisper for her. Just relax and have fun, this is your day after all. She took a breath. Her aunt was right, not many days like this would come, she needed to enjoy it while it was here. It had been about 1.5 months since Thera's birthday and Ben was laying in bed, wide-eyed despite the time of night and struggling with a question. How to train the areas he was falling behind the most in. Ignoring agility, since he had no bonuses to it, he wanted to train his mana and vitality attributes more. Both could be improved by spending either mana or life force, but any way he could think to go about it wasn't desirable. Mana didn't seem like it should be too bad given that his recovery rate was so high, but he would spend all day working on different enchantments when he wasn't focusing on his crafting, and even if he put his all into powering them, he hadn't seen much benefit. As for vitality, he'd gotten to enjoy some pretty severe beatings in order to get a skill that would hopefully help him keep more of it in a fight, but it was no substitute for a bigger vitality pool as a whole. The only issue with training that was he'd need to lose vitality regularly in order to improve his growth, and he wasn't big on the idea of frequent beatings to make it happen. So what could he do? Ideas swam around his head and only one stood out as being exceptionally terrible, while at the same time being the most viable if he didn't want it to take time out of his more important training, time that went towards what he would consider his core skills. Damn it, this is going to suck. He thought to himself as he quietly got up and dressed, before making his way to the shop. When he got to the shop, he started heating up the forge before he removed a few materials he was going to need from his bag, namely Deathstone and Morabuzal. 2 materials that once went into a weapon that his teacher described as savage would be going into a tool he'd be making to try and train himself. He was pretty sure there was some irony there, but he wasn't sure if he could see it at the moment as the thought of what a crazy idea this was filled his mind. Still, he pressed on. He had a bit of processed Morabuzal left from making Will's gauntlet and cut a square centimeter of it, placing it on the table with his hand on top of it for a few seconds while looking at his card to determine the rate of mana loss. Even that small amount was far more than he needed as he saw the numbers drop on his card, and he kept shaving it down, taking care that none of the slivers got away from him, until the value on his status didn't change. From there, things took a turn for the truly dangerous as he repeated with the Deathstone. He was even more cautious with that metal than the last, knowing it would be a dumb way for someone to find his body in the morning if all of his vitality had been sucked out from mishandling it, and he was sure his god would be screaming at him if Myriad had been watching. But he tried to ignore both of those facts and instead focused on figuring out how the stone's volume affected its vitality absorption rate. Once that was done and he got a piece big enough to do its job without killing him, he got to work. He heated up a small strip of steel and shaped it so it would be just slightly too large to fit on his pinky finger, all the while melting down the few slivers of the other metals he'd gathered. He carefully coated the inside of the ring with a particularly dangerous alloy and watched it from the side as it cooled before cleaning up his mess, taking extra care to ensure he didn't lose track of anything that might be a danger to his teacher, or worse, a customer, before he carefully picked up his creation by the safe outer rim and looked at it admiringly. You know, if I made it so this couldn't be taken off for as long as it was able to suck vitality, I'm pretty sure this would qualify as a cursed tool. But this small item wasn't something he ever intended to use on anyone else. No, he'd be putting it on himself, and forgetting the small bit of hesitation he was feeling slid onto his pinky finger. He was immediately aware of its presence. Unlike the numerous other rings on his hands, this one had a notably unpleasant feeling to it, and he didn't doubt for a moment that it came from the slow draw of his internal energies. He was taking his life into his hands doing something stupid like this, so he had to be sure it worked. That meant that instead of doing something productive with the next few hours, he sat down and stared at his card, wanting to be sure there wasn't a steady decay in his attributes, and like that, he watched and waited. Boy, what in the infinite hells are you doing? His teacher yelled as soon as he got in and saw what Ben was staring at. Oh hey Fock, just testing a new magic tool on myself. Since it would be a bit dangerous if I didn't make it right, I figured I should observe it for a little bit to be on the safe side, but my attribute decay is slightly less than my Regan rates, so I should be fine. The Yeti could only shake his head. What, you making torture tools now? No, I just figured that since I have bonuses to my vitality and mana, I should make something that would let me train them a bit. It's not like it matters how I use them, so I figured having it forcibly sucked out of me should be fine. Only crazy people think like that, his teacher told him, pinching the bridge of his nose as he held out his hand. Let me see if you're gonna get yourself killed wearing that. He obediently handed it and his card over when Fock asked for them as he looked at both, hemming and hawing before finally returning the items. Well, you won't be killing yourself with it, but I can't say it'll be fun to wear. Just what put that crazy idea in your head? It actually came from my intense desire to not die, he explained. Even if I have defense enhancement now, my vitality is way lower than I'd like and I can't train it without using it, not to mention the fact that I've fallen into mana exhaustion way too many times for someone who doesn't have a magic skill. It got me thinking about how I could train them and how other attributes are trained. For strength or agility, some people might use a weighted vest or something like it. I just figured this would be my equivalent. Fox seemed like he wanted to argue, but ended up just sighing. Alright, I see what you're saying, even if it is all sorts of dumb. Just do one thing for me, only wear it while you're sleeping. It shouldn't matter if your attributes are being sucked out of you then, but it wouldn't be good to make a habit of wearing it. Imagine you wear it on a hunt and you're attacked, or you forget to take it off after some strenuous enchanting. If you ever go into mana exhaustion wearing that, then who knows how long it would take you to wake up. Those were all very good points his sleep-deprived mind hadn't considered, so he slipped it back off and put it in his pocket. He wouldn't be having a restful sleep with it on, but he'd manage. Putting aside those masochist tendencies, how's the order looking? A few days before, a customer had come in looking to have a spear and shield made to match his specific size requirements, and the job went to Ben. A majority of the time when someone wanted a new weapon or armor, they would get something that had been made in advance and either take it as is or have some adjustments made to fit it to the customer's needs for a small fee on top of the item price. Custom-made items were a different beast. Since they'd be put together from scratch, they were more expensive from the get-go, and since Ben had been given the responsibility this time, he'd wanted to make the best ones he could. I finished up both yesterday, I just need to add the enchantments today. Well, bring them out so I can have a look before you head off to your little library. Ben smiled. That so-called library was his current pride and joy, not to mention helping him get his job experience at an altogether ridiculous rate, but he'd get to enjoy it soon. He grabbed the items for Falk and his teacher gave them both a look over. He was silent for a few moments, staring at both shield and spear intensely before giving the good news. Congrats, boy, you made it to mid-uncommon for both. You just might make your goal today. Woo. Just you watch, Falk, I'm feeling it. Mid-uncommon might seem a bit underwhelming to be so excited for, especially when he'd made it to ultra-rare before, but this was different. In the past, a lot of what probably pushed his items so high was both the expensive materials they'd been made of, as well as the complex enchantments placed on top of them. These were different, being made of common metals enhanced with low-rank animal bones and still waiting to be enchanted. That meant the current rank of the item was entirely due to his skill and technique in making them. It was a reflection of his true growth as a craftsman. Yeah, go get it done before the end of the day, I'm not waiting around to evaluate them and I want both ready for the customer for the morning. Ben knew his teacher wasn't being too serious solely for the fact that it wouldn't take him an entire day to enchant them. At most it would be a few hours if he was being extra choosy on what skills to use, and he took the items to the back room where he kept his library. It wasn't filled with books like the name might suggest, instead it was a collection of organized boxes, each one split into a 10 by 10 grid, and each section contained a single ring, with a skill name and level written beneath it. More so than getting defense enhancement, having the chance to copy each and every one of Zandale's skills had been the biggest boon to him, to the extent that he would have been happy not getting a single skill if it meant he could access all of this, and in the time since his collection had only grown. Despite all the benefits they provided, Zandale's skills had one major drawback. They were all at most level 3 due to the fact that he never dedicated much time to actively training them unless a particularly good opportunity came along, like it did with Falk, as everyone waited for him to be treated, and a few exceptions ended up at even lower levels than they should have. Since Ben could currently copy skills from a person to the 5th level and copy an enchantment to the 4th, that meant he wasn't able to enchant with them to his full potential, which resulted in a separate system being put in place in the shop at his request. When the works Ben made sold, he would get the profit for it, minus the material cost and the part of it that went to his teacher for both hosting them in the shop as well as taking the time to train him. The thing was, he didn't really need the money at this point. His time in Analia had gained him far more than he'd ever expected, and he could be set for years if he needed to, so a system had been set up at the shop he could take advantage of. The way it worked was simple. There was a book at the front of the shop that any customer could flip through with a full list of all of the skills and their levels he currently had rings for. If anyone had a skill he was missing, or else a skill at a higher level but less than his current limit of 5, they would get a fixed amount of money off their purchase. At the end of each week, Falk would add up how much customers had saved versus how much Ben had made. If Ben made more, it would be rolled over to the next week, but if customers saved more, then Ben would pay the difference to his teacher. There were plenty of people who wouldn't take the option, preferring to keep their skills private, but more would at least give it a look. After all, what was revealing a skill or two in the name of some savings? It only got a few takers so far, but word was getting around and the adventurers especially were curious. Saving a bit of money translated to having more to buy better equipment with, a fact they all knew could be life-saving. After taking a few days to organize them, he had each box labeled and split up in a way that would make it easy to find, and he was glad he took the time. It made grabbing all of the skills he wanted to use for both the spear and shield all the quicker. He tried to stick to Falk's golden rule of not enchanting in a way that could hamper the user's personal skill growth, though that could occasionally be tough since he didn't always know the custom skills if they were determined enough to keep every one of them private. It was a safe assumption that he couldn't make use of spear wielder or shield wielder for sure, but otherwise he would be able to at least limit the potential negative effects relying on enchantments could have by using partial enchantments, only taking a very specific effect of a skill to use instead of the whole thing, meaning the weapons user wouldn't be delayed in advancing their own abilities by much if they were to use his tools. Bearing all of that in mind, he got to work, starting with the spear. While spear wielder was a no-go, he could take the piercing properties of knife, push dagger, pin, and dart wielder from it and add the sharpening property of sword, axe, and scythe wielder, while at the same time matching it with blade enhancement which had similar effects to a greater degree. While he couldn't just keep adding effects from the same one skill again and again and expect anything but a minor boost, he could take similar effects from different skills and weave them together into a cohesive whole to get significantly more power. After that, he used both earth magic, as well as the skill sturdy and weapon strengthening as a means to prevent the spear from breaking in a fight and moved on to the next item, the shield. This one was a bit more straightforward. He couldn't use shield wielder of course, but by selectively taking defensive properties from armor enhancement, defense enhancement, gauntlet wielder, sturdy, and earth magic, he was confident that as long as the item had a bit of mana running through it, the shield would hold up, and to finish it off, he added his resistances to it. At least he tried to the best he could. He was still only able to place 90% of his potential resistance on it, and the only reason he didn't have to lower it down a bit just to manage how much had already gone into it was because there was no real reason to add the life or light resistances. Even though both items were enchanted with mostly low-level skills, through technique and application they turned into powerful magic tools that Ben would be confident to have his name attached to as their creator, but knew there was still room to improve. There were plenty of skills he didn't touch when making these solely due to the fact that he didn't understand them enough to know what properties the skill carried. As he learned more, he'd be able to become even more efficient with his enchanting, pushing the mana cost down to its limits while increasing the functionality. Looking down at both items he'd made, he couldn't help but smile. He was going to have some fun. He ran out to the front and waited for Falk to finish up with a customer before showing off his final product. His teacher took both from him and gave them a good look over, carefully inspecting the quality of his enchantment and commenting on what worked well and what areas he could probably improve on with a bit more practice, before telling Ben what he really wanted to know. Unfortunately, the spear's only upper uncommon, he said. But Ben wasn't worried. Since he didn't say they both were, that meant some good news was coming. And the shield? Lower rare. Congrats boy, Falk told him with a smile. Through his own efforts, without having to rely on any fancy materials, he'd managed to break into rare. It was clear he still had a ways to go. This was his first success and he knew he wouldn't be able to do it consistently, but as he improved he'd be able to get there more and more, and as long as he kept increasing the number of enchantments he had access to and his understanding of those enchantments, he would only get better. The grin plastered across his face wouldn't go away, but the day was still young and there was plenty of time to work still. So since that's done, anything else on the agenda for me, or should I just focus on replacing some stock? Our storage room is still a mess, so for now organize it a bit more, but try to keep in mind whatever you think you might be able to use before the day is up. I've got an order coming in soon and we'll need the space. You got it. He went to the back and gave it a look over, trying not to get stressed by just how much was in there as he did. It was completely stuffed, and it was his fault. Wedrow had come a few weeks back to pick up the orders he put in for Steph and Will. Unfortunately, his friends couldn't come as well. He would have loved to see how they'd react to the gauntlets and cloak he'd made, but they apparently had a strict training regiment they couldn't get out of for the next little while, instead having Wedro carry some letters for them. As nice as those were to get, they weren't the only things he received from the flying worm, as he opened up his spatial storage and took out all of the various monster parts Ben had disassembled and had him take care of during their time together. With everything that happened, he'd completely forgotten about it all, and the storage room had been filled up recently enough that things were pretty tight in there. When Fox saw it all, they closed up for the rest of the day to do their best to organize everything, as well as treat the bones and pelts to preserve them for long-term use. The meat was even harder to deal with. To keep it all from spoiling, he'd had to put his new rings to use and consult with Wedro before he headed off about space and time magic. By being able to use 5th level enchantments, he was able to double the empty volume within a space, and though he couldn't stop the time within it the way someone with an awakened time magic could, he was able to slow it down to a reasonable extent so long as the enchantment could get enough power. With all that in mind, Fox had quickly thrown together a large, insulated storage chest with a white mana crystal embedded into it, which Ben did his best to add the space and time enchantments to, as well as a water one to keep a cooling effect. Just because the time within it was slowed down, didn't mean it wouldn't all still rot in the heat after all. God, that really was a busy day, he thought with a laugh. The worst part was they didn't even get any demon corpses. Since he was so close to dying, nobody wasted any time to collect them, instead focusing on getting back here as soon as they could so he could be treated. It was such a waste, but better than being dead. Reflecting back on it, wasn't that an idea for how he could make use of some of the materials in there? He wouldn't be able to waste mithril or any mana stones as a means to power the enchantments, but he could easily use some of the leathers to make spatial bags, and he could add both the enchantments for slowing time and cooling to make them even better for any adventurers that might want to take them out for the day. They'd have to use some of their own mana every now and then to make sure the enchantments kept their power, but that was far from a big deal if they were just going to be out for a day. Customers would need to be informed it might be risky to use them longer than that, given the need to sleep might let too much time pass, but if they did anyway and the bag ended up damaged by being overfilled without the benefit of the space enchantment, that just meant they'd need another. Oh yeah, that's going to be perfect, he thought as he got to work pulling out the leathers to use later, before getting back to the storage room. He started trying to move things around, pulling different items out every now and then if he thought they looked like they'd be useful and grouping other similar ones together to find them later. A part of him wanted to waste more of his mana crystals to make even more spatial chests as a way to make it a bit more organized, but he resisted. He still had plenty left, but he doubted he'd ever be able to get the sort of quantity again unless he was going to do something crazy like actually marry Thera so he could bug her parents for a wedding gift. Actually, when he thought about it, maybe they'd give them even more if they went through with it and tied the knot. When he considered it like that, maybe he would see if he could talk her into going back for a quick little ceremony. Or not. I can't see things ending well for me if her parents ever found out that's the reason we got married, and I'm not positive Thera would be thrilled with the request either. Back to being thrifty with what I've got, I guess. He still had plenty of materials he hadn't even touched because he couldn't figure out a way to use them that would be justified given their rarity and expense, but there was always the future. If he went up another level or two in his crafting, he'd feel a lot more confident in a couple of his crazier ideas, but that could wait. Damnable gods, boy, how much of that are you planning on using? Fox asked when he came back to check on him and saw just how much was sitting in the hall, pulling Ben from his thoughts in the process. His pile had grown rather large, but the storage room was looking far more manageable at least, and he explained some of his plans to his teacher. I figured we could get rid of a bunch of the leathers by making spatial bags, and with the way Thera's been going through staves recently, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea for me to make a bunch in advance. The rest is all just to replenish some of the stuff we've sold in the last week. Since Thera had gained her mother's backing from completing the trial, as well as gaining all the magic skills she was capable of, she'd been burning through staves recently by practicing her skills in the training grounds when she wasn't busy studying to use more complex spells in the future. Even with how much Ben had improved in making them, it was getting hard to keep up, but Pelenia paid well, so it was worth it all. Alright, but this is a few days of work at least. You still got your little project at home, don't you? Can't be staying here all night. I'll leave on time, don't worry. I just figured I'd get as much done as I could and leave the rest in my area for tomorrow. Alright, then if you're all set, I'll leave you to it. Fox left to go back to his own work, leaving Ben to get started. He decided on doing the staves first. Since they would become Thera's as soon as they were complete, that meant they could charge her mom immediately and wouldn't have to worry about waiting for a sale. His overall technique hadn't changed too much for producing them, nor did it need to. With Thera's growth in her magic, her control had improved considerably, making it so even if he hadn't improved himself, they would still last longer than otherwise. Still, his skills had increased significantly since he'd first started doing this for her, and it showed. He was still making them to resist her magic, but now the staff was enchanted to resist earth, life, and dark instead of only earth as it had been previously, and the number of layers that went into it was up to 20, creating a smoother gradient for letting out her spells. He was also keeping detailed notes on what materials worked and what didn't, referring to them every now and then to try and figure out superior ways of producing a staff. Some metals seemed to work better in general, but occasionally inferior ones would show shocking improvements should the right bones or horns or claws be added to it when everything was being produced. He was sure that sooner or later he'd be able to find a perfect combination, something that would stand above all the others and elevate the sum of its parts, but there was still plenty more fiddling to do to get there. Luckily, it was fast work at this point for him. He'd made far more staves than anything else to keep Thera supplied, and as a 6th-level craftsman he was already quick with his work, using his mana to make his materials bend to his will faster than they would otherwise. It helped that his way of producing them could yield multiple staves at the same time by stretching out the metal as he went, and by the time the day was over Ben had 30 new staves ready for her to destroy. Eventually, Falk kicked him out for the day and Ben went back home to prep dinner for everyone, as well as work on his personal project. He was almost done with it and knew he'd be up all night if it meant having it finished even a bit faster, but he needed something to eat first. He pulled out some ingredients and started preparing them when Thera got home and looked over his shoulder. "Smells good, what's for dinner?" "Just a simple stew. Since we had leftover roast from yesterday it shouldn't be too long to cook." Even with the benefits of his crafting to speed up the cooking process, he didn't want to spend too much time to get the meat tender, so taking advantage of some leftovers made for a good shortcut to having it done in an hour or so. "What's up with you, do anything fun during the day?" Not really. Spent most of the day working on my earth magic and telekinesis. Speaking of, I'll need a new staff. Way ahead of you. Come to the shop tomorrow, I've got 30. You're the best. Yeah, just make sure you keep a record of what you're doing with each one so I can see what works and what doesn't. She made a face at the reminder, but agreed. I know, I will, but is it really that helpful? I can only watch how you manage with them when we're out hunting. If I can't understand how they turn out, they'll never get any better. Weren't you going to try making a staff with my hair at some point?" she asked, running her fingers through the golden strands that had made their way past her shoulders. It had been months since he first thought of the idea in Analia, and he'd even increased his crafting by a few levels since then, but he still shook his head. "Unless you're looking for a buzz cut, you should grow it out a little more. I'm not sure if it will even work, but the more I have to use the better the chances are." He did need to start trying to figure out just how he would go about it to give such a staff the best odds of success, but it was something he could work on in his free time, on top of his ever-growing list of projects and things to learn. They chatted some more while waiting for Sonia to get home and enjoyed their meal together. Once it was done though, the two women went to enjoy some card games until bed, and Ben focused on his passion project. It hadn't been easy to talk Sonia into letting him do a major renovation of her home. He'd had to make a lot of promises about completion times and paying to have any damages to be repaired if anything went wrong, as well as getting Falk to come give it a look over when he was done, but in the end she agreed, and he was able to get to work on finally having a shower. There was a lot that had to go into it and compensations he had to make for differences between what was available in his world to this one, to the point it felt like he was designing it from scratch despite the lesson he'd had, but after days of work he was almost done. He'd spent a lot of long nights putting together the parts he'd be using, from making the tubing he'd need for water to travel through to making a basic filtration system for both physical filtration utilizing rocks and charcoal, and enhancing it through enchantments of both death and light magic, the first to kill anything that might be living within the water, and the second to attach a variety of different purification spells to it as a means to control other things like off odors, as well as ensure no death mana lingered within it. This all served as a way to ensure the water could be reused multiple times without having to worry about changing it out every day, though he still probably would about once a week just to be safe. The pipes that led to the shower head were also enchanted with both water and fire magic, with water used to both move the water within and create pressure, and the fire magic to heat the pipes the water was traveling through, warming it up as it went. The tricky part was creating two taps to control the strength of each, but after a couple days of fiddling he'd made it work. Finally came the big part though, the one that actually made Sonia nervous about all he'd been doing, knocking down a wall. He needed all of this to be in a dedicated room to avoid causing water damage to the rest of the house, and while there was always the option of making it separate from it, he wanted to be able to walk in without having to worry about actually leaving the entire building. It all came down to having a more comfortable experience overall, even if it might seem like overkill. Until then, he'd been working on all of the construction from the outside and late into the night, but that was all done, so it was finally time. He carefully cut away sections, adding additional support where he thought it was required, but overall it hadn't taken long at all, and he put in a door. With that complete, he had to finish up the last bit of one of the outer walls and ensure the vents in the room were set up properly, but he was finally done. God, it's a thing of beauty. It's a room. A slightly damp room at that. You wouldn't understand, Myriad, those of us who don't come from aquatic races need to bathe occasionally, and we can get pretty attached to how we do it. My race was only aquatic during a few specific stages of our life cycles, but alright, I'm sure it's very impressive. Yeah, enough patronizing. I'm testing it out, so don't watch me while I bathe. He'd been looking forward to this for a while, and dreams were about to come true. He'd even gone so far as to incorporate a very small rainbow mana crystal into its design, so there'd be no chance of it running out of power if it was left on too long. He couldn't leave it running forever, but a few hours of constant use wouldn't be a problem. He turned it on, getting the heat to match his preferences, before getting in and fiddling with the pressure, letting the time flow by once everything was perfect. Oh yeah, I'm in heaven. It would be easy to dismiss this as an over-exaggeration, but when a person was used to bathing a certain way every day for years and suddenly has that taken from them, it could be hard to feel properly clean. For Ben, it felt like over a year's worth of grime had drained away all at once, and the familiar sensation of warm water pouring over him was divine. The time melted away, and he was happy to stay in there for as long as he could, just enjoying the feeling, but all too soon a knock came on the door, interrupting him from his peace. He heaved a sigh, knowing he needed to get out soon anyway, and wrapped a towel around his waist as he went to check what the knocking was about. He opened the door for Thera, who stood silent for a moment. Her eyes being solid gold spheres, no pupils to show where her focus lingered, it would be hard for most to tell where she was looking, but Ben had gotten used to the subtle movements of her eyelids, and combined with a small golden flush across her face, he could tell she was a bit more aware of his lack of dress than he'd thought about. Ahem, maybe you should actually put something on before you open the door. Sorry, I didn't know if it was anything important, so I figured the towel was fine. What's up? We've just been hearing the sounds of water since the early morning, but nothing from you, so Auntie asked me to check that you're alright. Seeing as you're fine, I'll leave you to get dressed. She cast one more look at him before walking off, leaving him with a lingering feeling of embarrassment as she did. More days passed as Ben continued his work in the shop, making a variety of items, some to be sold in there, and others handed off to traveling merchants Falk knew as a way to empty out the storage room without cluttering the sales floor or workshop in the back. All the while he was trying to learn as much about the various skills he had access to enchant with as he could, from reading up as much as he was able in the few books on skills present in the Adventurers Guild archives to having Myriad gather information for him that he could record later. He had a goal in mind after all, and he needed every bit of information he could get to achieve it. When he got home for the day it was slightly later than usual, with both Thera and Sonia already there, dinner ready and waiting. They ate their meals as they always did before going to the living room and getting to work. He had prepared a variety of braces ahead of time and he got Sonia to wear the first one as he carefully applied the resistance enchantment to it to cover up her charm, but at only up to a resistance of 12 so that there would still be plenty leaking off of her when they measured it. That brace would serve as the baseline while he experimented with the others. To each one after he attached a variety of skills and partial skill effects to try and enhance the charm suppression of the initial magic. He was doing this with Sonia instead of Thera for a few reasons, the biggest being time. While he would still take almost a full night to apply the enchantment Thera needed, with the amount his enchanting had improved, Sonia's could be completed in around 15 minutes, meaning he could easily complete them one after the other to measure and compare its effects. He spent hours making them all, Thera and Sonia playing board games in the background as he worked, but by the end he had a dozen different braces made, each with a different enchantment added to the original one to try and enhance it. Alright, time to test it out, he muttered, getting Thera to throw on her cloak so her magic wouldn't interfere with the tests, and got Sonia to wear them all one at a time, with Ben setting up the passimeter to measure any variance in the charm she released again and again, recording the results each time. Kind of crazy that it took 3 hours of setup to make all the enchantments, but I finished testing them all in 10 minutes. Testing's typically faster than making if you don't need to travel to do it, and it looks like the results aren't too bad this time around. Myriad wasn't the only one to notice he'd had some success. The other two could see the smile stretched across his face that hadn't been there the first few times he'd attempted to improve the resistance enchantment with them. "Don't leave us waiting, what are the results?" Thera asked, excited to see some potentially good news, considering how any success had the chance to help her live a more normal life. Taking the magic resistance effects of armor and shield enhancement brought the enchantment's suppression effects up by 1, while defense enhancement's magic resistance managed it by 2, though since that skill was at the first level while the other two were at the 0th, it might just be an effect of the greater skill level. Either way, I'm going to need to grab enchantments of all 3 at the highest level I can get to see how that affects things. Other than that, it looks like tying in a 4th level purification spell from light magic had no effect on increasing the resistance. As disappointing as it is, I guess that was a pretty obvious result. Trying to purify mana of the affinity tied to it is probably one of the first things people test when trying to come up with a solution for all of this, but it's still good to have gotten it out of the way. There's still plenty of other skills I can try to experiment with after I learn a bit more about their properties, but at least this is some progress. Even this much meant he'd need to go the Guildmaster Cecily to update the information in his patent so all the other enchanters that worshipped Myriad could get the chance to learn about it and hopefully make stronger resistance braces without having to level up their skills as much, but it still left him a ways off from his goal of completely managing Thera's charm, even if he was on the correct path. Given the power of her mana, there was a good chance that she wouldn't get more than a point or 2 of her charm suppressed, even if all 3 skills were put onto the enchantment, but that just meant she needed more and at a higher level. I wonder if Falk could find any enchanters with high levels in those 3 skills? He muttered as he rolled ideas around in his mind. It probably wouldn't be too expensive, and even if it is, it would be worth it for the research. He didn't want to just try and throw money around till a solution presented itself, but he needed to do something if he was going to get any results soon, especially since he was fast approaching a certain limitation that he couldn't get around. Since he had enchanting as a blessed skill, he was able to use 15% of his resistances per level instead of the normal 10, but that meant at his next level up he'd finally be using the full potential of the resistances he had. Even if he leveled up more after that, he wouldn't be able to increase the strength of Thera's resistance band by changing it to have a greater level of resistance. If he couldn't find enough other ways to supplement it, any increase he could squeeze out would all come down to technique. While he might be able to make it past that in some ways if he were to awaken his skill, that was still going to be far off if ever, and he needed as many potential options as he could get to make it work. He continued to mutter about it, tossing different ideas around in his mind as Sonia placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Ben, it's okay," she told him soothingly. "Don't worry about spending your money on this, just tell me what you need and we'll get it." "Thanks, Sonia, but I can't ask you to buy anything when I don't know if it will go anywhere." "Oh, it won't be me," she said with a small laugh. "My sister has more than enough reasons to be invested in the results of you researching this. Give me a list and I'll send it to her. Anything you discover could help my people as a whole, and Pelenia won't spare any expense if it means helping her daughter." "That is an excellent point. Gotta take advantage of the absurdly wealthy in my life." "You're absolutely right. For now, I just need the highest level of those armor, shield, and defense enhancement that she could get on rings for me, so if you could ask her for those that would be great." "Let's see, I really should get around to finding a few books on skills I could reference to see if any of them stand out as having potential, so if you could order some of those too I'd be grateful." "I'll let her know, I'm sure she'll have them here in no time." "Great, in that case, I think that's all I need from you guys tonight. Thera, if you're cool with it, I'll update your enchantment tonight with what I have to see if it improves the overall effect for you." "So another night of you hovering over me while I sleep then?" she joked. Even if she wasn't crazy about it, she'd also long grown used to it, and it especially helped that he'd gained hidden mind so his thoughts weren't too distracting. "I mean, if you'd prefer we could do it during the day, when I'm off, instead of going out to hunt. As fun as the thought of doing nothing all day, without being able to move is, tonight works fine. Give me a bit to change." The effects of altering the enchantment were minor, but that was to be expected. As a 5th level enchanter, he'd been able to get the effect of Thera's charm at a distance down to only needing a resistance of 19, while her effect on contact needed a resistance of 29. Both values were far too high for an average person to deal with, though it was still a significant improvement overall. After tying in the effects of the other skills, he'd only managed to bring both down to 18 and 28 respectively, meaning that what would act as an increase of 4 for others, she could only get 1, if that. It was entirely possible it was acting as a fraction of a percent that just happened to be enough to tip things over the edge, and he wouldn't know for sure until he got access to higher-leveled versions of the skills to attempt with. Worse, when he did the math, it didn't work out. Assuming that for every level those skills had, they could compensate for an extra point of resistance, and Thera would need at best 4 levels to get a point off. That meant that even if he became a 9th-level enchanter with access to 9th-level skills, he would only be able to bring Thera's charm down to 6 for distance and 16 on contact. A remarkable improvement to be sure, but still far from safe, considering how low people's magic resistances could be, not to mention the fact that if her charm magic ever leveled up again it would only get worse. Aside from that, everything he'd just considered was built upon more assumptions than he cared to think about. There was no guarantee that each level of the enhancement skills would translate to an increase in resistance, and he needed to do more testing to be sure about how the skills affected the overall power of the brace. God, why can't things just be easy? Who knows if I'll find any other skills with properties that can help. The ideal would be able to make it so it could cover up to what she would hypothetically need at charm level 5 so that she could train it up to level 6 without worries and be able to suppress it herself, but I can't even cover it at level 1. Still, he'd suffered on it long enough. Fock knew he was planning on working on the braces through the night and wasn't expecting him until later, so with all of his testing done he slunk to bed for a few hours of sleep. Hey Myriad, perfect timing, I don't suppose you know any other skills that might help, would you? Something that has some sort of magic resistance or mental effect suppression tied to it? Not offhand, sorry. There's so many skills in the world, it can be hard to keep track. I think your current plan of getting some books on the topic is a good bet for the time being. His god seemed distracted, a fact he was quick to pick up on. Something on your mind? Myriad was silent for just a moment, seemingly thinking before giving an answer. It looks like I'll need you to act as an apostle in an official capacity. Satchel's in prison. Wait, what? It had been a few months since his fellow believer went off with her party to try and complete the quest Myriad gave her. He hadn't heard anything from his god until then, but had been under the assumption that she'd had something in mind when she left and was just trying to find a solution for it, not that she'd been jailed for some mysterious acts. What did she do? Well, it seems she'd spent the first few weeks trying to find a different option for fulfilling her quest at the pleas of her teammates, but failing that she went to her home village to try and solve an issue they'd been having involving their sacred forest. I'm still not hearing why they're in prison. It seems that entry into the forest is restricted to the believers of the dryad goddess Jagal, and since she converted to me. She broke the law, got it. Still doesn't tell me what it has to do with me. I'd like to ask you to go to the village to try and resolve this in an official capacity as my apostle. You don't need to get her in the forest or anything, just convince them to let her go so she can find something else. Ben was hesitant. Ignoring her party, he liked Sakhel well enough, he just genuinely didn't think he could do anything. I don't know Myriad, this seems a bit above my pay grade. Isn't something like negotiating a prisoner release the sort of thing you want a professional to handle? You think I wouldn't get someone a bit better for it if I could? None of my believers are equipped for this sort of thing, I'm banking on the idea that they'll give you some leeway as an apostle. He let out a long, pained sigh. Can you at least make this a quest? Give a little payoff for what sounds like it might be a lot of work. I can't, his god told him regretfully. You have the quest options you have, I can't create them as willy-nilly as other more powerful gods. Alright, just figured I'd check. Anyway, I'll do it, just remember to cut me some slack in the future, okay? Of course, Myriad told him, relief leaking from him. Despite Ben being his apostle, he couldn't compel him to act. Most gods wouldn't need to worry about something like that, their believers' faith would be all it would take to get them to move, but considering the fact that Ben's opinion of the gods was so indifferent, he'd been lucky to have a strong enough relationship that he was considered a friend, there was always the chance he'd be turned down. So how long of a trip am I looking at? Don't suppose it's just a town over and I can get away with getting it done overnight? You're looking at about 8 days of travel both ways, but if you can solve it all on day 1 it will be fine. What are the chances of that? 16 days of travel, not including however long he'd spend trying to sort it all out. Was there a way he could build something that would act as a car in the future? He didn't care how hard it would be to construct if he could figure out some way to cut down on travel times. It was times like this he missed Earth a bit more than usual. Gate travel was only handy if you lived in a gate city. Being a 5 days carriage ride from the nearest one was a pain in the butt, and he'd give anything for a car or plane. Anyway, tell me how to get there and I'll go as soon as I can. Falk was understanding enough. Even if he was going to take a few weeks off, it gave him time to focus on some of his own tasks he couldn't complete with Ben around, and to the residents of the world it made sense for an apostle to fulfill the requests of their gods. What mattered was telling Farah. He wasn't sure how she'd react given that her relationship with them all was rocky, especially Sko, but hoped that things would be fine overall as he explained what had been asked of him. So anyway, that's what Myriad wanted me to do. I'll be gone for a few weeks to try and deal with all that nonsense. Unless you'd want to join me? There it was. It didn't matter if she said yes or not, he'd be fine on his own. All that mattered was putting the offer out. They were a team after all, they'd promised to work together to solve their problems. Even if she was sure to decline given the people involved, he wouldn't rush off without even asking, and while he was dealing with this she could focus on improving her magic or reading some medical books to improve her knowledge skill. Alright, when are we leaving? She asked, leaving him dumbfounded. Today if we can. I was going to book a carriage after I asked you, but are you sure? I know you aren't exactly a fan of them and we may be stuck together for a while. I think the entertainment of seeing them imprisoned for a bit will be worth it, so I'll start packing. Need me to get you started while you get the carriage sorted out? No, I should be good, he told her and walked off to get them a ride. Still, for her to come along for that of all reasons. What was that saying again? Hell hath no fury like a woman's scorn? He was able to get one without much issue, and they went on their way. Farah brought a few books to pass the time while Ben spent the time working on his enchanting, doing his best to get as much practice as he could while only having the magic rings he'd taken to always wearing, as well as the skills that existed within him. He'd gotten a fair amount of job experience in the past few weeks considering some of the oversized enchantments he'd been able to make, as well as the fact that he was able to experiment using so many different skills compared to other enchanters thanks to his connect, and he didn't want to lose that momentum by treating this time as a break. Even if he didn't have all of his boxes of rings with him, he could use it as a chance to learn about enchanting with magic to an even deeper degree, although it would be more exhausting than compared to working with a skill not tied to his affinities. As nice as it would be if I could enchant with other people's affinities the way I can with their skills, that would be a bit too much to hope for considering all I already get out of Connect, though maybe if I ever awaken it. It was a fun thought, but he'd have to put in a lot of work for training the skill, especially since it was so hard to determine what jobs gave bonuses to a given skill unless it was obvious. Sure, Connect still had the bonuses associated with it from when he had worked on completing the priest path, and it was guaranteed minor ones now that he was an enchanter, but would it also be getting the main job bonus as well since the way he used the skill was so tightly linked to his enchanting? And for that matter, what about his crafting job bonuses? He was fairly certain that enchanting received them since it was counted as a crafting skill, but what about Connect? Even though he used it so closely with enchanting now, he hadn't started to treat it that way until the end of his craftsman job. Would that have any effect, and were the skills that qualified for a bonus dependent entirely on how he used them? He'd tried asking Myriad once, but was essentially told it would vary by the jobs and skills involved. The only way to be sure was to check both with an awakened analysis type skill, an extreme rarity for someone to possess. He could try to look for someone who had won by throwing some money around. It would probably be better than just blindly hoping that his skills would work out the way he wanted, but it would likely cost him a small fortune as well. How much would I be willing to pay to improve my skills? I suppose that as I improve, I could potentially make better and better tools and weapons to sell that could replace any losses, but I'll hold off for now. Besides, if it were really expensive I could always let Pelenia know I'll be back in Analia for a bit to make some braces. With how much my enchanting and Connect has improved, that would be easy money. By now the majority of Myriad's believers had the skill. So long as they were practicing hard then in a few short months he'd have a nice passive income as well. Thinking about all that, he would have to spring for a faster carriage on the way back. No point spending extra days on the road when his time was valuable. Of course, since he had the time he could also start fiddling with ideas on alternative means of transport for the future. Hey Myriad, you around? Anything I can do for you? Just wanted to spitball. What do you think of the idea of making a small but light carriage with a sail attached to it and enchanted with an air magic spell to push it along? I wouldn't need to worry about hiring a cart each time I needed to go anywhere this way. I think the mana cost to get anywhere that way at a decent speed would be ridiculous unless you used some of your magic materials, and even then you'd probably want to tie it to an enchantment of a higher level than you're capable of to lower the mana cost as much as possible. That's not even mentioning the fact that plenty of people would want to steal something like that if you just left it outside. True. Maybe I could build some bikes? They're definitely faster than a typical carriage, but the wheels might be an issue. I don't think they'd work as well if I used wooden or metal ones like a carriage, but I haven't seen anything like rubber around. Maybe I could make a substitute out of leather or some other material? It might take some experimenting. I'm not familiar with either bikes or rubber, so I can't offer too many opinions on the topic, but the thoughts going through your head make it seem a bit more feasible at least. Wait, hold on a minute. Are you seriously telling me that bikes haven't been invented here? He asked his god, his interest fully piqued. There's nothing like that to my knowledge. The gears turned in Ben's mind as he gave that some thought. Despite how common they were, he was fairly sure bikes had only been invented a couple hundred years before he was born, making them reasonably modern compared to how simple they seemed. He was certain he would be able to create one without much problem. It just created a single question in him. Myriad, I seriously need to know how this world's copyright law would deal with the fact that I'd be introducing an invention from my world to this one. Would I own the patent as the person bringing it to this world, or would it be considered public domain since I'm not actually the inventor? He expected it to be the sort of question that Myriad would need to search a bit for an answer, but surprisingly he could tell him immediately. This actually came up rather early on after all the summoned arrived. A handful wanted to earn as much money as they could despite having their nations backing them, and it caused quite the trouble amongst the crafting gods to figure out how to respond to it, since while it wouldn't be them protecting their own intellectual property, they'd still be introducing new ideas into the world. The conclusion ended up being that while a patent could be made for such an invention, a working prototype must be made, and the duration of the patent would only be 20 years instead of the typical 100, and since you wouldn't be able to patent anything without actually being able to make it, the majority of the summoned had to back down. Being able to describe how something works and actually putting it together are very different things after all, and in the end, rather than spending who knows how long trying to make a functioning prototype, it made more sense for them to focus on their guaranteed means of riches through properly training with their host nations. So you're saying as long as I can make one, I have 20 years of riches ahead of me? Assuming they end up popular, sure. There's always the chance that nothing comes of it until after the designs are in public use. If that happens, then oh well, I just wanted something that could make travel a bit nicer. If I can make some money off of it, then that's just a bonus. Days of travel passed, but they'd finally made it to their destination. After making it through the gate, the cost for the next carriage to their destination of Syro Village was significantly more expensive. Unlike their initial ride from Stonewall, which would stop at other villages along the way so they could expect a constant stream of passengers and end with a more reasonable price overall, the one to Syro had none of that. Apparently, the small village was in the opposite direction of the gate they'd come out of from the next major city, and with only a few small towns in the area, the cost went up and departure times were significantly more restricted. All of this led to the place Ben saw in front of him, a rundown village filled with old, dilapidated houses, and the sort of atmosphere that made him want to immediately turn back. From what he could see, there couldn't have been more than 100 people living there, and even that felt like a bit too much. Even if it would take a few days, he would have thought that more people would move to the thriving city just a little while away, or at least one of the towns in its vicinity. But then again, plenty of people found themselves attached to their homes. Who was he to judge? Rather than dwell on it, he wanted to do what he'd come here for, freeing Sakhel and getting home. With that goal in mind, they walked past the houses and fields, looking for a building around that might have someone with a position of authority in it they could talk to when Ben started to notice something strange. Hey Thera, you notice anything odd about the people here? You mean like how nobody will catch our eye? No, I mean sure that's odd too, but I feel like we've only seen women out. Young and old, all at varying levels of health, but there wasn't a single male to be seen unless, of course, their race just didn't have much differences between genders. Everyone was basically a standard hominid type. The main difference from himself was their dark green flesh with leaves and flowers growing out with their hair, and they were all distinctly feminine in appearance. He couldn't be sure that wasn't simply how both genders looked, but still, it felt odd. I'm not certain, but I've heard before that dryads are an entirely female race. Wait, really? How does that work? Ben, you can't just ask things like that, she said quietly, hoping none of the villagers around heard him. Some races aren't super open about those sorts of things. Does that mean you don't know? No, I have a bit of an idea. Supposedly they're able to reproduce with different trees, with the children taking on some of the traits, depending on the species. Wait, that just raises some more questions. Like, if they normally reproduce with trees, then how could a mixed breed like Sakhel exist? One of the aspects of the system the gods placed on all of the races that came to the world was to help facilitate reproduction between races. It's kind of why I'm able to exist. Yeah, I get that, but pollination is different from the more fleshy stuff most races do, and given how they're built, it looks like dryads were probably able to manage that before they came to the world. So why is trees the norm for their species instead of just having two genders? Ben, I'm begging you to leave it at that before anyone hears and we're kicked out of town. His curiosity still nagged at him, but he resolved to question Sakhel on it later. He had other things to deal with for the meantime. Alright, I'll be good. Since I'm not seeing anything that stands out here building-wise, I'm going to ask for directions. Give me a minute. He spotted a dryad walking by and tried to wave them down, putting on his best smile and cheeriest attitude as if he were trying to make a sale in the shop only to be quickly ignored. Okay, maybe that one was a little shy. Not letting it get to him, he tried again, this time a bit more forcefully. Excuse me, he said, quickly rushing up to the next person he saw and trying to keep the same friendly attitude. I was sent to talk to the leader of the village. I was hoping you might direct me? This time went marginally better, at least in the sense that the woman he walked up to made eye contact, before turning around and walking the opposite direction. Okay, maybe the issue is me? If they aren't used to guys, then it's time to tap out. Alright Thera, your turn to make an attempt. She seemed put off, but gave it a try, walking up to the nearest person and asking them. Excuse me, could you tell me dash? Only for them to walk away before she could get another word out. Ben could only groan. He didn't think things would be such a pain just upon arrival. All he wanted was some directions. Was that too much to ask? Hey Myriad, you around? I could use some help. I'm available, what's the issue? I can't even get anyone to tell me where to find the person in charge. Think you could direct me? His god agreed, all the while muttering about what a bad sign it was for them to be having issues as soon as they arrived, but soon enough they were led to a house that looked like any other. It looked old and broken down, with a fence around it in a serious state of disrepair, yet at the same time a lush vegetable garden all around it. As a race that naturally possessed plant magic, it seemed they had no issue keeping themselves fed, but managing everything else was a whole other story. He tried to ignore it though, that wasn't what he was there for, so he went up and knocked on the door, waiting for an answer that didn't come. Myriad? Is anyone home? She should be in there, it looks like you're just being ignored. Of course I am, he sighed, bringing Thera up to speed and making a choice as to what to do next. He was here to negotiate for Sakhel and basically act as a diplomat. He couldn't just be chaotic or annoying to try and force her out to talk, so what did that leave if she wouldn't answer the door? I guess I'll try patience for now. He thought to himself, taking a seat and leaning against the house. Ben, what are you doing? Waiting. I won't be rude and annoying until I get an answer. I'm just going to sit here and knock occasionally until someone comes out. I'm just saying, if they don't want to talk, we could just go home. I'm sure Sakhel and the rest will manage. Ben gave her a look and Thera waved it off. Yeah, I know. At least I have some books to pass the time, she said before sitting down beside him. He was about to give the door a knock for the fourth time in as many hours when it finally opened. He looked up and put on his best smile, only to see an elderly dryad glaring down at him. In the name of all that's good, what do you want? She asked in a huff, clearly annoyed they hadn't given up and left for somewhere else after waiting so long. Ben, though, wouldn't let that get to him. He'd been too patient to allow the fact that they'd been forced to wait for so long get to him. Hello there, he started, voice filled with a level of cheer he just didn't feel. I was told you're in charge of the village, might I bother you for a bit of your time? If I say no, will you leave? No, but I'll stop knocking and just get ready to make camp out here. Maybe I'll be lucky and you'll be in the mood to chat tomorrow. To emphasize the point, He reached into his spatial bag and started pulling out a tent before her eyes, getting ready to set it up. She groaned, muttering something about damnable outsiders before giving in and talking. Fine, what do you want, and make it fast before I just kick you out myself. It's nothing crazy. I've heard that an acquaintance of mine, Sakhel, had been imprisoned for going into your sacred forest. I'm just here to see if I can negotiate her release. And how exactly did you manage to hear about this? She asked, her tone changing from annoyed to angry for reasons Ben couldn't understand. From here, Ben wasn't sure if telling the truth was the right choice to make. Should he be honest that he was the apostle of her God and heard it from Myriad? Given the fact that he convinced her to convert, which contributed to getting her imprisoned to begin with, there was a decent chance that wouldn't go over exceptionally well. On the other hand, maybe it would lend him a level of authority he could take advantage of to help their discussions. It was hard to say. For the time being, he decided to not commit to either action, just leaving the door open to the reveal should it become necessary. I heard it from my God. Since we were already acquainted and there weren't many others he could ask, the request was made to me. Her eyes widened and she seemed taken aback at first, before hiding some of her emotions. If that's the case, I guess I can see why you've been so determined, but they'll be serving their sentence for trespassing unless you intend to pay their fine. Wait, what? Just a fine? How much is it? For that matter, how long would they be imprisoned for if I don't pay? It's 2 months imprisonment for entering the forest. As for the fine. She pulled out her card and added the amount into it, leaving it out to read and for him to tap, should he choose to. What? That's like a year of living expenses. Couldn't I just let them wait it out instead? There should only be about a month and a half left, right? Please don't, Myriad asked desperately in his mind, causing Ben to deflate. Of course you don't want me to take the easy and cheap route out. She's trying to get Sakhel to convert back. I can't be losing a believer this soon. Satchel's already pretty deeply devoted, it's fine. He thought while sighing. Any chance I could see them before deciding? With a nod and a wave of her hand, the elderly dryad brought her out around to the back of the house. Neither he nor Thera knew what to expect, but it seemed like just an empty lot. He was actually surprised there wasn't just another garden like had been out front, but found the answer before he knew it as the village head reached down and revealed a thick wooden hatch, previously hidden by grass and moss growing over top of it. She pulled out an old key, sinking it into a hole in the door, before pulling the entire thing up, revealing stairs leading into the earth. Thera and Ben looked at each other, trying to silently communicate whether or not they should walk down into the earth, but the village elder went down and without much other choice they both followed. It didn't go down far and there was a source of light, although faint, and despite the seriousness of the situation and just how uncomfortable it seemed, the moment they reached the bottom and saw Sakhel, Sko, and Raelia, Thera burst into laughter. The village head gave her a surprised look, but Ben ignored it. He kind of understood where she was coming from. While Sakhel and Raelia had just been sitting down on the dirt floor, looking kind of sad until they'd noticed who'd come, Sko had been bound to the wall by thick and powerful plant roots. His legs, torso, and each of his 4 powerful arms was secured to keeping him from moving. Okay, getting to enjoy this made the 4 hours of waiting worth it, Thera said, causing the elderly dryad to drop just enough of her negative attitude to cast Ben a questioning look. Thera has a bit of a complicated history with them, he told her with a shrug as Sakhel spoke up. Ben, what are you doing here? A bit of light had returned to her eyes as she saw them and her voice was tinged with hope. Myriad asked me to come help you out, so I made my way here, but seeing as how you could have been freed after a couple months or just paid a fine if you wanted out, it seems like it was a waste of my time. Why exactly didn't you just pay? He asked, wanting to get to the heart of the matter before deciding what to do. Unfortunately, it seemed the reason was entirely practical. Do you really think we all have that much money? She asked, which was a fair point when he thought about it. Just because he'd managed to gain an unreasonable level of wealth in a short time didn't mean everyone would have that much saved up. And as for being stuck here, do you think you'd be able to deal with being stuck in a dark pit for 2 months? We'd really appreciate the help. She looked at him with pleading eyes, and Ben sighed. A part of him thought this whole thing might be partially his fault for converting her, but a greater part was saying she should have known better to go into an area she wasn't allowed. Even if he was the apostle of her God, he wasn't her keeper. Still, Myriad sent him to help, so as long as they were agreeable, he would. Okay. If you guys agree to pay me back over the course of the next 2 years, I'll pay to get you guys out. Does that sound reasonable? Sakhel and Raylia quickly agreed while Sko seemed like he was trying to, but couldn't from how tight the roots binding him were. Actually, isn't that kind of dangerous? I may not know what sort of vitality he has, but breathing is kind of important. He cast a quick concerned look to the man, but he wasn't dead, so he figured it was fine and turned to the village head. Okay, I'll pay, let's get this over with. She looked shocked he actually agreed to spend so much, but pulled out her card and tapped it against his, receiving the funds he'd transferred over while Ben couldn't help but feel he'd been a little scammed with the cost. With that done, she walked over to Sko, placing a hand on the roots that bound him, and after a few minutes, they were loose enough that he could walk out. Once that was done, they all quickly left the dark, damp hole in the ground, and Ben let himself be thrilled to have finished up everything so easily. They would need to find somewhere to sleep for the night, but he'd done what Myriad wanted and they could get home while Sakhel and her friends focused on finding some other way to complete her trial. At least that was what he'd hoped. Alright, you're all free to go, so be on your way and don't come back, the elderly dryad spoke, and Ben was more than happy to agree. Don't have to tell us twice, come on guys, let's dash. Grandmother, please. I just want to help. Sakhel told the woman desperately while cutting him off. Wait, grandmother? Myriad, what the hell have you dragged me into? Ignored by his god, he instead got front row seats to the fight breaking out in front of him. The moment you abandoned our god, you lost your place in the village. Outsiders aren't allowed in our forest, so either rejoin the faith or leave. Nobody here has any fighting skills. If you don't let us in, then what will you do? Sakhel asked, desperately, as if begging the woman to let her help, but was only met with scorn. We'll manage alone, as we always do. If you're so determined to cling to whatever god convinced you to turn traitor, then we don't need you. We're all a part of the same world, we need to be able to ask for help if we need it. Because that's worked so fucking well in the past, hasn't it? The elderly woman screamed back, before regaining some control of herself. Dryads depend on dryads, and you're already barely that. As far as I'm concerned, our relationship was severed the moment you abandoned Jagal. There was so much venom in the old woman's voice it was enough to stun everyone. That is, everyone but Ben, who stepped between the two and had gone deathly quiet, trying to contain his rage. Apologize. What? You went too far. Apologize for saying that. He wasn't planning on backing down, but neither was she, and instead waved him off dismissively. I don't expect outsiders to understand. You got what you came here for, so get lost. I have a village to look after. He held his tongue for a moment, just long enough to think through what to say next without just swearing at the woman for a while. As good as that would feel, it wouldn't be constructive. We're just not allowed in your stupid forest, right? There's no rule against us staying here? Are you really going to stay just to be a pain in the ass? No, he told her with a shake of his head. Sakhel will solve whatever stupid problem your forest is having without ever setting foot in it, and then after you'll apologize to her and invite her back with open arms. The old woman let out an angry chuckle, more than ready to kick them all out should a chance come along. Fine, but the moment any of you walk into the forest, you're getting locked up and I'm sending off for some Templars to deal with you. Excellent, as the apostle of Myriad, I fully intend to hold you to that. With that he turned around and marched off, not waiting to see the old woman's reaction as he started talking to the air. Hey Myriad, give me the quest for earning a large amount of faith from non-believers, I'm going to make these jerks love you. Received quest, Faith of the Foreign. They walked on in silence for a while, the three they'd come to save not knowing what to make of Ben's declaration, and Thera wanting to give him a few moments to calm down. Still, it didn't take long until they were well away from Satchel's grandmother's home when he turned around to speak to them. Alright, first off, Thera, sorry, but it looks like I might be here for a while. If you need to head off, I understand. Don't worry, I'll help you out, she said while placing special emphasis on the fact it was Ben she was doing this for, not the others. Thank you, he told her warmly before turning to the other three. Now you lot, tell me what's going on in the forest. Since you mentioned fighting skills, I'm assuming some sort of monster has made its home in there? Sakhel seemed troubled by everything that just happened, and Sko was still dealing with the after effects of being secured to a wall for what seemed like the 2 weeks since they'd been imprisoned, so Raylia was the one to give an explanation. A group of frost bats has taken up residence in the forest the dryads cultivate and are slowly killing it. We wanted to eradicate them to complete Satchel's quest, but if we can't go in there's nothing we can do. She's right, Sakhel said sadly upon finding her voice. We should just leave, they don't want our help. Ben grabbed the girl's shoulders and forced her to look him in the eyes. Sakhel, I was told this is your village, you must have known the rules about the forest before you went in, but you did anyway because you wanted to help. Are you ready to give up now? There's nothing I can do. They'll take it a lot more seriously if we break the rules a second time. So then let's work out a plan, he told her, trying to sound like the sort of confident pillar that could support the effort the task would require, until another question needed to get out of the way. But first, is there anywhere in the village we could stay if we're going to be here for a few days? They were led through the village until Sakhel found the place she was looking for, bringing them to another of the rundown houses and knocking on the door. A small girl answered and looked the group up and down. Ben couldn't imagine what a young child like that saw, considering how scruffy Satchel's team was after a few weeks in an underground prison, not to mention how mysterious Thera might come across being fully cloaked, but with an indifferent attitude she just turned her head and yelled out. "Mom. Satchel's here with some weirdos." With that, the young girl ran off and her mother, looking to be in her late 20s or early 30s, though it was hard to be sure from the difference in species, came to the door. She looked at Sakhel, ignoring the rest of them as she sighed and brought her into a hug. You know, you really should have stopped by to say hi before getting yourself in trouble. Haha, yeah. Sorry Fontesh, we were looking for somewhere to talk and figure some stuff out, mind if we come in? At that, she finally gave the rest of them a look over before turning around and walking back into her home, letting the rest of them follow her. Taking them to a kitchen, she was quickly given an explanation of what happened and the fact that they were looking for somewhere to stay. Fine. I've got a spare room, a basement, and a shed out back, you can all split them however you'd like while you're here. Me and Thera will take the room, Ben told them, not leaving room for any arguments. They hadn't packed to be there for a long time, and while it might not have been extremely necessary from how thick each wall was, it meant he'd need to place the enchantment he'd previously tested at Sonia's on the room to be on the safe side, and it would be significantly easier to do there than the basement since he assumed it would be the smaller of the two options. Presumably, a shed would be easier still, but that wasn't happening. Alright then, me and Raelia can take the basement, Sakhel said agreeably. She wasn't about to argue when Ben had come all the way out to help her and was going to assist with her quest as well. That just left the last of them. Yeah, do you at least have any spare blankets I can use? Sko asked as he saw how things were turning out, to which Fontesh promised to see what she could find. While that was going on, Ben had a quick but important conversation in his head. Hey Myriad, how much assistance can I give Sakhel for it to still count as her completing the quest? It really comes down to her taking the active role and receiving credit for the work. So if I give her a plan to work through as long as she's the one to complete it, then it's fine? That's right, and the idea going through your head sounds pretty good. Have to say though, your mind's getting pretty noisy with all the separate streams of thought. I'll train my hidden mind a bit later. How does other people helping her affect things, and if I give her a plan of attack, can I do any more to make things work out? If she's the one taking charge, then it will be fine to have others working under her, it will still be her accomplishment. As for you doing anything else, it would be fine if she were clearly in charge, but since you're the apostle of the god she worships she might not be able to help but defer to you. I would separate yourself while letting her know that she can request things from you if need be, but to try and limit it. Sounds good. Alright everyone, now that that's settled I'll need you all to listen to how we're doing this, and I won't accept arguments. If there's anything that won't work, because it will cause trouble with the village speak up, but that's it. First things first, sorry Thera, but can I ask you to work with this lot to try to deal with this? I already said I'd help you so don't worry about it. You're the best. In that case, I'll want to know some details about the woods, namely how big is it and how often do people go in it? Fontesh was the one to answer that. Currently it's just a small grove, a bit more than 2 acres that's mixed into the rest of the forest. Expansion of it has stopped for now since a few villagers have been attacked, and nobody is to go near it till the problem has been resolved for everyone's safety. Wait, so this sacred forest is just a group of trees mixed into a larger, less sacred forest? It's made up of trees from our homeworld, the Dryad explained. We can't reproduce with other trees so if anything happened to them we'd have to break up the village and join other Dryad communities, not to mention the loss it would be to our species as a whole. There's already so few of us, not to mention how little plant diversity we possess. Alright, so there's a genuine reason you all take such good care of them, noted. Either way, we won't do anything that might cause them harm, so you don't need to worry about that. It's actually super simple, me and Thera do it to hunt all the time. We'll just use her magic to draw out everything in the forest and attack it. Well, I say we, but I have other things to do. Also, I don't know how you all usually do things, but since this is Satchel's quest, she's in charge. If I find out she couldn't complete it because someone else decided to take on the leadership, I'm raining down hell. When he said that, the mood of the room became significantly more tense, and he could see nervous looks forming on everyone's faces. Well, everyone but Thera, whose face was covered like always, but seemed to be getting a fair amount of amusement from the discomfort of the others. Man, am I really that intimidating? You represent a god, and everyone in this room knows it. A threat like that is something to be worried about. Wait, does that mean that gods will curse people or something if their apostle asks? What sort of chaos can you spread if I ever need you to? What? No, keep your villainous ambitions out of your head. While gods might punish their own believers, and should they witness another god's believers act poorly enough, petition them to deliver punishment, I can't personally punish the mortals under someone else. We have rules up here so we don't descend into chaos. Having said that, not all mortals are entirely clear about the rules in place between different gods, not to mention that as my apostle you are the main head of my faith, standing above even the head priest and the oracle. You have the authority to move my believers as you see fit unless I act to stop you, which means even without me doing anything you could potentially cause extreme chaos for someone through a harassment campaign or even potentially arrange an assassination, though I don't exactly have the believers to manage either, and I along with many other gods would disapprove of that sort of behavior even if I did. Not to mention you couldn't do anything to the point that would make other gods intervene. Well, if they feel threatened and it keeps them in line, then I have one less thing to worry about. Please don't scare off the first believer you manage to get me. Relax, I'm far too charming for that. I just won't correct them about whatever they're currently thinking. There were still a few hours of sunlight left in the day, so Ben instructed Satchel and her party to collect a variety of large stones for him, not for her quest, but as a way of completing his own while he focused on preparing the room they would be staying in. It was significantly smaller than the living room he'd first tried this enchantment on, to the point it felt more like a storage room that just happened to have a bed, but that meant he'd be able to get it done in a couple hours while Thera focused on moving the items in it around to not disrupt his workflow. Once that was complete, they had to focus on the next problem, powering it. In the future, he resolved himself to get a small piece of rainbow mana stone and carry it in his spatial bag with the first aid kit, just in case he'd ever need it like he did now, but until then he'd have to take a different approach with the only thing he had available to him. The first church of Myriad itself, his coat. When he'd first made it all those months ago, he'd gone far heavier on the mithril than he'd needed to just for powering the temperature control enchantments that were on it, which had always been a small regret of his. It was wasteful, and he could have put it to better use, especially considering how annoying it was to repair it each time something damaged it while attacking him, but for now at least he would be able to take advantage of that previous mistake. The metal was able to absorb any surrounding mana to directly power the enchantments placed on it. It couldn't hold on to the mana to the same extent a crystal could, but it also didn't need to be prepared in any specific way to extract mana from it either. As long as he connected it to the enchantment he'd made on the room, he'd be able to power it at least a little, giving Thera some time she could remove her cloak without having to worry about others. The enchantment would be weaker overall, but not enough to be an issue, so that was a smaller concern. The fact that this enchantment worked at all was something he felt pretty proud for figuring out, though it did have its drawbacks. It didn't decrease the charm on contact at all, and it only reduced the charm at a distance, depending on how much mana was put into the enchantment itself, but it was progress in his goal of understanding how to suppress passive magics. All done? Thera asked as he put on the finishing touches. Yep, now for everything else to worry about. Having said that, the two of them had very different immediate worries in their heads. Yeah. So are we splitting the bed? She asked, voicing her personal concern. They'd camped out enough during their hunts together that spending a night together wasn't an issue, but they'd always split the time into different watches. There was no need to do that now, and while Ben had seen her sleep multiple times, that had always been while he was focused on changing the enchantment on her brace. This was a bit more close quarters than that, with the options being a bed barely large enough for two people or one of them sleeping on the rough wooden floor. Ben, having given no thought to the matter when he requested the room, left it up to Thera. Doesn't matter to me. If you're more comfortable with it, I'll sleep on the ground. I won't make you do that, she said after a moment's thought. It's not like you'll try anything anyway. I'm the picture of manners. Anyway, I don't think I'll be sleeping tonight either way, so worry about that tomorrow. I decided I'm going to make this town love Myriad, and by God, I'm going to make that happen. She was going to ask just what he was planning when a knock came on the door, which he quickly got up to answer. We've got all your rocks, Raelia said, handing one over while leaving the rest in the hallway. There's even more outside if you need it, but hopefully this is enough. This is plenty, thanks, he said, giving them a nod before addressing Sakhel beside her. And just so I don't do anything wrong, I'm able to cut down trees as long as they aren't from your sacred forest, right? There's no issue if I go to some other patch of forest? That's right, I'd just recommend you don't go to the woods in the north at all, so you avoid making any mistakes. Anything you cut down to the east should be fine. Excellent, thanks. He wished them all a good night before getting to work. He would be needing some tools to use, but didn't bring anything from the shop since he hadn't expected to need it, meaning he'd have to get creative. Taking advantage of the destructive properties of enchantment, he worked the rocks down the same way he would to make his statues, slowly creating everything he would need for when he'd begin working to win the townsfolk's hearts and minds. A hammer, a chisel, a file, and a saw. All were necessary for the plans in his head, and he could always make more if need be. The biggest issue was that he didn't think they would hold up as well as their metal counterparts, but he could work around that. Making use of his earth magic ring, as well as the enchanting spells, harden and strengthen, he enhanced the items to the best of his abilities, sure in himself they wouldn't break from regular use once he was done. He still had some time left before his next task, so he got to work shaping the rest of the stone the others had already brought up for him, alternating between spinning tops and small, sturdy statues of animals from Earth and some he'd seen from this world that he attached wheels to so they could be rolled around. Without the sort of entertainment he'd had available in his homeworld, he was hopeful that these would prove enjoyable for the few kids in the village. He noticed Thera had fallen asleep by the time he was done and quietly cleaned up a bit before slinking out of the house, trying not to disturb anyone as he went around back and started banging on the door of the shed. It took a few minutes, but Sko finally came out. Oh good, you're awake, Ben said cheerfully, as if he weren't the reason for that. I needed someone to carry things for me, so come on. Instead of answering, Sko just looked up at the moon for a few moments. You know, I couldn't have been asleep for more than a few hours. And you can sleep more when we're done, now chop chop, we're burning moonlight. The faster you help me the faster we all get to leave this village. He looked like he wanted to argue at first, but the prospect of getting to leave sooner seemed to appeal to him and he obediently followed Ben out as he left the property and began walking towards the eastern woods. Seeing the other man following him, Ben was more than content to go on in silence as they made their way, but Sko had other ideas. So wouldn't it have been fine to just get Thera to help you? He cast a quick look back at the four-armed man, wondering if this was going anywhere as he answered. Thera takes mage jobs, she doesn't have any strength bonuses. Since you presumably have at least 1 or 2 warrior-type jobs under your belt, given the swords and shields, I'm assuming you must be fairly strong at least. I am, but I figured you'd rather have someone else around. I don't exactly get the impression you're my biggest fan? So that's what this is about. I'd actually consider myself mostly neutral to you. I don't like you because Thera doesn't like you, and as far as I can see she's justified in that, but it won't keep me from taking advantage of you as a resource if you're around. I've seen adventurers die before, the man said, anger coming to his voice. It's something I'd rather not repeat. Am I supposed to do nothing when I see someone driving someone else insane? If by seeing someone drive someone else insane you mean seeing someone harass a new guild member despite being warned of the potential consequences, only to suffer from their own poor choices, then no, I don't expect you to do nothing, I would expect you to think a bit harder about the side you're taking. Okay. Maybe I'm a little less neutral to the man than I thought. Just thinking about it was pissing him off, but he did his best to suppress it, no need to get in a fight when he still needed to use the guy. It seemed like Sko wanted to say more, but Ben didn't care enough to push him and was content to carry on in silence until they made it to the forest's edge, where he quickly found a suitable branch to act as a handle for the axe head and wedged it in before handing it over. He looked around and found 6 good trees to use for the meantime, pointing them out to be chopped down and having the branches cut off before moving on to the next one. Once the first one was complete, Ben got to work. He wanted to have the logs ready to use as quickly as possible, which meant drying it out, and since he didn't have months to wait to get that done, he'd have to craft an enchantment to speed it up. Going along the full length of the log, he carefully wove together one, making use of fire, water, and air magics, needing to be slow to keep himself from falling mana exhausted and cursing as he went. Even though he could make use of the magics thanks to his connect, his lack of affinity with them mean that even the enchanting cost was surprisingly high and he needed to be careful, though thanks to taking the time to research a variety of magic spells after getting his rings, he at least had a good idea on how to craft enchantments with them without being instantly drained. The fire enchantment he'd put on it was the core of it, heating up the wood enough that any water within would begin evaporating out, while the water enchantment tied to it was to speed up the rate of water loss and wind to gently move the air around the log itself to keep the humidity low. He was feeling pretty pleased with how it had turned out, and by the time the 3 more logs were prepared for him, he was done with the first one. "Hey, when you're done with that, I'll need you to start running your mana through that log for me to power my enchantment." Alright, but I don't have a huge mana pool." "Oh, how much do you have?" He was a little worried. It made sense that a warrior may not need a lot when they'd be focused on using weapons, but he should have known better. "Only low 200s, so I can't be too intense with it." "What?" "You'll be fine, just regulate your output," he ordered before muttering under his breath. "Only low 200s," he says, as if that isn't already above what the average non-mage has. "I'd kill to say I only have low 200s. Feeling he touched a nerve, Sko went back to getting the next trees cut while Ben focused on constructing his enchantments, and like that the night passed for the men. Thera woke up alone, not surprised to see that Ben must have gone the entire night without rest working on whatever plan he had to complete his current quest, and followed her bind skill to find him. It was early in the morning still, which meant he was in the first place she'd look, even without it. He was in the kitchen cooking breakfast, and for whatever reason, the small dryad child was sitting on his shoulders and hounding him with questions. "What's that?" "Pancakes, it's a breakfast from my homeland." "Why aren't we having fraddles?" "Well, I've never had a fraddle, but I'll see if your mom'll teach me later so I can make them tomorrow if you want." "Yes please, they're the best." Alright, you got it kiddo." "Hey Mr. Apostle?" "Yeah? Why do you look so weird?" "I promise I look very normal for my species." "But you're not green and you don't have boobs." What?" "Not everyone has boobs, you know? Or green for that matter." "Why not?" "Let's see, I'm going to leave that as something you should ask your mom, okay?" "Okay." Cute. Thera wasn't used to being around small children, but it was adorable seeing the young girl so full of questions and energy, and there was a certain charm to how patiently Ben was talking to her as he worked, despite his hair being pulled and his chest kicked as she swung her legs. She watched their exchange for a little while longer until Fontash came into the kitchen. "Delaire, if you're going to make him carry you, then at the very least don't kick him while he's doing it." "Sorry Mom." "Why doesn't he have boobs?" I'll tell you a bit after breakfast, okay hun?" "Okay." "Thanks for putting up with her," she told Ben. "I know she can be a little energetic." "Don't worry about it. Food will be ready soon if you want to wake the others." "Oh, but Sko's only been asleep for 2 hours, so maybe leave him to rest." Fontash agreed and went down to the basement while Delaire continued to play with his hair, while Thera walked up beside him. "You're good with kids." "It was only a couple years ago my brother was her age, I'm used to it." She saw the look in his eyes and cursed herself for asking. It should have been obvious given what she knew about him, but even if he'd answered, Ben always got a little bit sad when he'd think of his family. She could see it in his eyes before he'd try to push it away, and she was never good at knowing what to say when it happened. Thankfully Delaire changed the topic, but the new one wasn't much better. "Why are you dressed like that?" she was asked in a voice filled with childlike innocence, and left having no idea how to answer the question. The honest explanation was a bit complicated to tell a child, but it also wasn't something she should brush off or lie about. Luckily, after a moment of silence where she struggled to figure out what to say, Ben saw what was going on and gave one himself. "You see, there is a super pretty girl under there, so she has to hide away or else everyone would fall in love with her." "Isn't that good though?" "It might seem like it would be, but she wants to be appreciated for her personality instead, so she has to hide away her looks." The young girl was now staring at her, wide-eyed and full of wonder. "Can I see?" Maybe later," she said, awkwardly deferring it. "Yeah, I'll make you a magic necklace so it won't cause any issue, you'll just have to wait a bit, okay?" Okay. The girl seemed satisfied for the meantime and went back to kicking Ben's chest, already forgetting what her mom had told her as Thera quietly whispered to Ben so she wouldn't hear. Was that the best you could come up with? It's basically the truth, I just phrased it so she'd understand. Well, I guess it got the idea across. Still, how am I so bad with children? Ben made it look so easy. They continued to chat for a little longer until everyone but Sko was there and Ben served the pancakes and a fruit sauce he'd made, a meal she'd had a few times now, thanks to living with him, but was a novelty for everyone else eating it, especially Dallaire who seemed instantly taken with the dish and as she devoured it while Ben outlined his plan for the day. So like I said before, I won't be able to give you guys much help from here. I need to find materials to make resistance amulets for everyone, and other than that I need to figure out some work around the town. Speaking of, Fontesh, I couldn't help but notice the enchantment on your cold box isn't the greatest. If you're willing I could redo it so the mana cost is lower, or remake it to take just as much but have a time aspect added to slightly slow the span of time within it. You could do that? She asked in shock, and seeing the seriousness in his eyes was quick to agree. If you're willing, then adding the time effect would be fanatic, thank you so much. Don't worry about it, I can look over your other enchanted items as well to see if I could make any improvements if you'd like. Also, I couldn't help but notice the fence around your home and the house itself is broken down in some places, please allow me to fix it for you. I couldn't possibly put an apostle to work like that, she said in a hurry. Improving the cold box is already more than enough for giving you a room for a while. Please, don't worry about that, he told her as Thera watched him throw on a smile and growing wise to what he was doing. I'm both a craftsman and an enchanter by trade, and as an apostle it's my duty to help people. Since I'll be here for as long as it takes Sakhel to complete her quest but can't do more for her than I already have, I might as well do what I can for the village. Speaking of, I think I should be able to finish anything the house needs today, please let the others in the village know my offer. I get the impression they aren't used to outsiders, but I'd like to do what I can. Fontesh looked touched and Satchel's eyes were sparkling seeing the apostle of the god she worshipped wanting to help her village so badly, even Raylia seemed impressed, but Thera could immediately tell what the point of all of this was. So that's why he's being so open about being an apostle, he doesn't want all these good deeds to be attributed to Ben, but to the apostle of Myriad. She didn't doubt he was fine with doing all of this to help the village, though he was probably putting a bit more effort in than he otherwise would since he was specifically trying to make his god look good. Still, it was probably a good idea to try and get the village to warm up to them a bit regardless, even if he was being over the top about it. In the face of that offer, though Fontesh couldn't help but agree. They were all aware of the state of the village, and having a competent craftsman to try and fix it up would be a blessing. All that was left was whatever she would do, an issue that was quickly resolved by Sakhel. I was thinking I could show you where we'll have to be hunting if that's all right with you? She asked. The half-dryad was trying to be polite, knowing full well that while she had never acted as blatantly antagonistic as Sko, they weren't exactly on the best footing either, but she agreed easily enough. After all, she'd already told Ben she'd work with them, there was no reason to back out now, just because she didn't like them. So this is the edge of the forest, Sakhel said after their hike to it. The trees she was pointing to were a far more vibrant shade of green, though there were trees from the surrounding woods mixed in as well. Damaging them is a far greater offense than just entering the woods for outsiders, so we won't be able to use your magic at all, but if you can draw the frost bats out then we can handle the rest. Since I've last worked with you, I've gained the Zeroth level in both dark and life magic, as well as telekinesis if that helps with your planning, though the last one isn't much use in battle. Since she was going to be working with them for at least a few days, she knew that sharing the improvements to her magic skills was for the best, even if it felt a bit too open. Sakhel seemed surprised by her situation to have changed so much in the past year when she could only use earth magic at a low level, and Raylia looked at her with approval. What led you to learning so many branches of magic? The Naga woman asked curiously. You seemed pretty obsessed with your earth magic before. That hasn't changed. I was told that people in my situation where the difference between their power and control is so great can increase their control by getting a broader range of magics, with each one increasing the wielder's overall abilities as well. I've been seeing decent results from it, but my affinities won't let me learn any more and I was only able to get the one non-affinited one by luck, so for now I just need to work on improving them, specifically improving life magic and telekinesis. She would use her dark magic when she needed to, but given how many she now had access to there was no need to push it while Ben was making progress improving her resistance brace. Oh cool, and that gives us a few more options for dealing with them once they leave the woods, so that's great. Sakhal said enthusiastically. For now, let's just survey the area around the woods to figure out the best way to go at it and regroup at Photoshes after. With Sakhal taking the lead, they walked around the area, trying to judge the best place to stage their attack while at the same time noticing a few other dryads watching them from a distance. It was obvious they were there to keep an eye on them to make sure they didn't break the rules, but if they were going to insist on staying in the area, then Thera was going to have to make a note to herself to ask Ben to prepare even more resistance amulets. She couldn't very well avoid going into the forest only to break the law by attacking the minds of bystanders, even if it was unintentional. Sakhal noticed them off in the distance as well, and her mood noticeably fell. It wasn't hard to see why. This was her home village, presumably where she'd grown up, and now because she'd changed her faith she was an outsider. It was already up in the air how she'd been treated here, given that it looked like she was the only half-breed in the village, but the fact that she'd come back to try and help for her quest indicated that it couldn't have been bad, despite the way she and Ben had been avoided when they arrived. Raylia picked up on her companion's mood, and while not changing the topic to a more cheerful distraction, asked something that had been on her mind. So Thera, I wanted to ask about what happened with your friend and Elder Hentaf. He seemed more angry on Satchel's behalf than I would expect. True, as nice as it was that he tried to help me with grandmother, it was a little surprising. She made a face under her hood, having an idea as to why he was so angry, but not sure if it was her place to say. Still, it might be better to give them some clue than to let them bother Ben about it when he already had so much he wanted to do. It's a bit of a personal subject to him, so don't go bothering him about it, but Ben isn't able to see his family again, no matter how much he wants to. I think he was just angry to hear yours talk to you like that. The answer caught the other two women off guard, and if anything the atmosphere of the group got worse. Great, can only go up from here. She thought sarcastically to herself, all the while wishing she could just work with Ben like usual to deal with this. After the girls had left to work on figuring out how they would get rid of the frost bats, Ben began his own goal, earning myriad faith amongst the town. It started out easy enough. Fontesh showed him all of the enchanted items she possessed, which wasn't too many. The cold box for storing food, a water jug for collecting water from the air, a stove for cooking, and a few simple lights. None of the enchantments on the ones she owned were overly complicated, and Ben was able to improve them all. It looked like they had all been produced with lower levels of magic than he was capable of enchanting with, so he was able to get them all working better while being more mana efficient in only a little over an hour. The problem came when he wanted to start repairs on the house and asked about a resource he was certain would be available, given that all of the houses seemed to be made out of wood. Wait, what do you mean there isn't any oil in the village? He asked, shocked. We all have some around for cooking of course, but the quantities you're looking for just aren't something we can manage. Why is it so important? Ben could only groan. He suddenly understood why the village was so beaten down. The entire place was rotting. The wood the houses had been made from hadn't been treated beyond just charring it. Sure, that would help to increase the lifespan, but that was no substitute for properly sealing it all. He had to wonder if that meant that the villagers had made their homes themselves without properly understanding how to do it, or if they'd been ripped off when they hired someone from outside, but that didn't matter. All that meant was his workload had just drastically increased. Or did it? He was in a village full of plant mages after all, maybe they'd be able to do something about it. Hey, this is a random question, but I don't suppose you could stimulate a tree to yield its sap or extract the oil from some seeds. It might be possible, but if it is, I'm not sure how. We typically use our magic to speed up the growth of a plant or to increase the yield of our crops. I could probably make a tree grow more seeds if that would help. It would be great if you could do that. Considering that it sounds like your house hasn't been treated at all, I'll need a lot. Would you be free to go to the woods now? Alright, since I've already tended to my garden and the sacred forest is off limits, for the time being I've nothing else to do during the day. I'll just be a minute to find Delaire. Cool, pretty sure my worker has had enough time to sleep, so I'll grab him and meet you out front. He made a pit stop to the room to empty out his bag before running to the back of the house to bang on the shed door. It took a few minutes, but eventually a groggy Sko answered and looked up at the sun. I could only have been asleep for a handful of hours. And I haven't slept at all, don't be a baby. I need to collect some more things from the woods, so I need your help. The sooner this is done, the better off Sakhel will be. Isn't this part to help you? Helping me create a favorable evaluation of you in town will probably be good for her, too. Now, hush, I'm not losing my free labor. The man groaned but gave in, taking only a single one of his swords and strapping it to his hip before they met up with the other two. Dallaire seemed to be filled with energy at the idea of the little outing and immediately tried to climb Ben. Fontesh apologized while trying to keep her daughter under control, but he just laughed it off and placed the kid on his shoulders as they went off to the woods. When they got there, Fontesh took Dallaire off his hands and brought her to a nearby tree. She knew they could get seeds that could be used for lantern oil if anything went wrong with their enchanted lights, and started stimulating them to grow, training her daughter in the magic at the same time. Ben handed them his spatial bag so they could fill it as they went and took Sko around, trying to find any good fatwood to extract tar from to act as a sealant, as well as for any shingling that might need to be done. He took his axe and went up to trees with dead, low-hanging branches and scraped away at the bark until he found what he was looking for and pointed it out to Sko. Here, see how the wood here is darker? Cut away every branch like this you can find. We're going to need a bunch. They needed branches rich in tree resin so they could extract it for their waterproofing, and they would need a lot. Given that there were almost 30 houses in the village, if he was going to be getting every one of them done, he'd have a lot of work to do. How many is a bunch? Just keep getting them until I say to stop. At that his four-armed companion made a face, but he was having none of it. And no complaining aloud, this is infinitely easier than what I'm going to have to do. He handed over the axe and got to work on his own task, making even more tools he would need from any large enough stones he could find. Unfortunately, this time he wasn't so lucky as to be making something simple, like a hammer or an axe. With only the destructive power of his enchanting, as well as the hammer and chisel he'd made the previous night, he was going to have to slowly chip away at rock to make both a sealable container to produce tar, as well as an oil press. Once he found the first rock big enough for what he needed, he took a seat on it and closed his eyes, mapping out how he was going to go about it in his head. It would take a while and he'd have to be careful to avoid any mistakes that would need him to start over, but it was possible. Starting with the sealed container, he used his enchanting to selectively weaken areas of the rock he was at, shaping it to be a more uniform cylinder while being careful to leave two sturdy handholds on the sides. From there, the next task was to hollow it out, turning it into a large pot the wood could be put in. This too wasn't so hard to accomplish, with the greatest difficulty being to maintain the mana running through the stone chisel he'd made to keep it from breaking. While not hard to do as it didn't require a lot of care, it was still slow. By the time he was done the pot was almost complete. All that was left was creating small holes in the bottom for any tar to flow through, as well as creating a bowl to catch it and a lid that would be reasonably airtight. The bowl was easy enough. He just found another large stone and began shaping it the same way he'd done before, taking more care to create a lip for the first container to sit on. It was the lid that would be slightly more difficult. He could simply try to create a lip at the top of the pot for a lid to sit on and cake it with mud to keep it airtight, but he was worried that wouldn't be good enough, especially since he'd never made anything like this before. Instead, he carefully cut a spiral channel into the rim, while cutting the lid to match so both pieces would screw together. He'd still cake it with mud when he was using it to be sure, but he was confident it would get the job done. With that complete, it was on to the oil press. His immediate issue was that he only had a rough idea on how to put one together, which might impact his overall yield, but there was nothing he could do for that. He'd already asked Fontesh if the village had one he could use, but it seemed any time they wanted oil they simply did it by hand. He couldn't help but marvel at how vastly different the lifestyles could be in the world, from how advanced Analia was with its abundance of magic materials, to his regular lifestyle in Stonewall, which while lacking compared to his life on Earth hadn't been so bad as a whole, to this. He was sure if the Dryads weren't so cold to outsiders then their overall standard of living would improve, but there was nothing he could do to change how they lived and instead he got to work on the press. The design for this one was simple, though he'd have to make it all in one piece. It came down to making a pot with a small hole in the side where any oil obtained would be squeezed out, but at the top of it there would need to be a thick bar with a threaded insert for a screw-like bar to be. The challenge was that the bar needed a handle at the top for twisting, with a base that would go into the pot, matching its diameter, meaning the entire thing would need to be made from the same piece of stone without taking anything apart. By the time he was done, he felt mentally exhausted despite having 3 mines available to him, but his work was far from over yet. With tools complete, he looked to the others with him. Fontesh and Dallaire had almost filled the entire cubic meter of space the spatial bag provided, and Sko had assembled a large pile of usable sticks. All that was left was getting it all back so he could get everything started. Oh my god, I miss the shop so much. Having all the resources I need at my fingertips is a blessing that I'm a fool for taking for granted. You're exaggerating. Am I? I'm going to be at this for hours. When they got back while carrying the pot for collecting tar as well as the press and the spatial bag filled with seeds, Ben quickly sent Sko back to get the rest of the sticks he'd gathered while Fontesh went to ask her friends and neighbors if any of them wanted their enchanted items improved. In the meantime, Ben got to work to collect the tar from what he had on hand, digging a small hole for the pot it would drain into to sit in and placing the container filled with sticks on top, caking the lid with mud before lighting a fire around it. Once that was started, all there was to do was wait until they had the finished products, the tar he was looking for and charcoal as a side product he could give to the village for use. While that was going through, he set up the oil press, placing another container under it to catch any of the oil he managed to produce and filled the main chamber with some of the many seeds they'd collected. He wasn't sure how much it would take to get enough oil for not only treating all the houses in the village, but also their fences and anything else they'd need, but the two dryads had gone above and beyond in collecting it all. At the very least, it would be a good start. He grabbed onto the handle and began twisting, applying force and assuming it works, breaking down the seeds and extracting the oils within. Even if his strength had cracked the top end of average and the screw-like design was to reduce the amount of effort that was needed, it was still going to take ages. He worked at it for an hour, squeezing out a trickle of oil, as well as more water than he hoped would be present, by the time Sko was done running back and forth bringing all of the sticks he'd gathered. Oh, thank God, take over, will you? What? Come on, you're a warrior, you definitely have the strength to make this easy. There's plenty of other stuff I need to do as a craftsman to help the village. Think of this as earning your keep since you're staying here for free. I'm sleeping in a shed. Yes, instead of outside. Plus you got blankets to keep you warm. If you do it for a few hours you can get back to sleep. Maybe mind the fire too, so nothing goes out of control. The warrior backed down before Ben did, and with a sigh took over at the press, immediately having more success than Ben had as more liquid began pouring from the tool. As Sko got to that, Ben took the time to examine the fence and the house, figuring out just how much wood it was going to take to fix both. Luckily, while the house had plenty of areas of visible rot and decay, he was confident that the wood was thick enough that he could scrap it away without risking the house's integrity and apply the sealant. It wasn't perfect, but short of rebuilding the house, it was the best he was going to do to fix the place up. When he'd completed his little inspection, he went back to the front of the house and found Fontesh had come back with 4 other dryads. Seeing he'd have some work, he put on his best smile as he walked up to them. "Hello there," he called out cheerfully. "I'm sure you've heard from Fontesh, but I'm the apostle of the god Myriad. Since it seems like I'll be here for a week or two, I was looking to improve the enchantments of any items you have, as well as help with any maintenance around if you need it." 3 of them were immediately nervous of him, but the 4th seemed prepared to engage. "We've been told. We brought our lights, but these aren't cheap. Are you prepared to compensate us if you break them?" "Of course," he said confidently, not in the slightest concerned. "I won't even touch them if I don't think I can improve the enchantments on them, but if I do and mess up, then I'll pay to have them replaced immediately." She looked to Fontesh, who gave her a nod before cautiously handing over the one she carried with her. He took it, not making any sudden moves since they all seemed uncomfortable with him, and gave it a look over. From his experience, he was certain it was no more than a 3rd-level light enchantment, and a clumsy one at that. It seemed like a partial enchantment had been attempted, but it was still so much bigger than it needed to be. He was positive the mana cost could be cut in half at least, so he got to work unraveling the current one to replace with his own. The women stood by to watch curiously, but if they didn't have a decent mana sense that could pick up on his way of using it, then it would only look like he'd been staring at the tool for a few minutes before handing it back. "All done. That's it?" he was asked suspiciously, but he just indicated that she should test it for herself. The dryad looked hesitant but began pouring her mana into it to power the enchantment, and her eyes widened at the glow. While it had previously been only good enough to leave a room in dim light, it was now positively radiant, and she could feel it had taken far less of her mana to power it. The other 3 seemed just as impressed, and with less hesitation handed their own over one after the other. He was able to get them done in quick order and finished with a smile, trying to keep showing off a friendly attitude the entire time to put them all at ease. It wasn't like he would be rude to them if he wasn't trying to make his god look good, but with how uncomfortable they seemed he might normally come off as more put off by the interaction as well. Still, he needed to tear down whatever sort of emotional barriers the people of the village had to earn some faith for his god. Since I got all that done rather quickly, would any of you like me to see if I can improve the enchantments on any of your other items? He got the impression they were interested but hesitant, so he gave it one last push. Of course, I understand you might not be comfortable having a stranger come into your home. Fontesh, would you be willing to join us to put your friends' minds at ease? Alright, I'm sure Delaire will be fine for a bit, but what about everything you have going on? She asked, looking at the fire he had going and Sko pressing oil. It will be fine, Sko knows what to do, and he'll put the fire out if anything starts looking out of hand. If I'm gone for a few hours he'll manage. Her concerns covered, they made their way from one house to another. Each time Ben examined the enchantments available and redid them when he thought necessary, occasionally adding different effects as well if the owners approved, such as when he'd added the time enchantment to Fontesh's cold box. It took a few hours and by the time he left each house he felt the residents warmed up to him a bit, but there was still a distance he couldn't escape no matter how friendly he was. Instead of just accepting it, he decided to seek some answers from the only dryad who didn't seem bothered by him or the others. So what does this village have against outsiders anyway? I would think any dryad would be cautious of outsiders, from this village or not. Okay, cool, but why? Instead of answering she just chuckled and gave a question of her own. You're rather ignorant of history, aren't you? I'm ignorant about a lot of things when it comes to this world. Mind making things easy and just filling me in? Sure, it's probably better if you know if you're going to be here for a while. Centuries ago, my species and our forests were almost hunted to extinction to be used for parts.